Good morning, y'all. Okay, one more time. Good morning. Thank you very much. That's my Oprah. Now look under your seats, you'll find nothing. How are y'all feeling today? Energized? Ready for a whole new half day of excellent programming? All right, if you learned something new yesterday, even if it's that Island in the Streams is your seatmate's favorite karaoke song, give me a whistle. Who had an idea challenged, maybe changed? Ha! If you're coming into today's session revved up to collaborate, engage, and act, then please clap your hands if you're able. All right. We have another incredible lineup of speakers and sessions planned for today. Also, if you have not checked it out, drop by the red cube up on the mezzanine level. Action Network is running 15-minute training sessions throughout the morning. Check the schedule on your Hoover app. Now, we are going to present the Charles Taylor Prize for Excellence in Policy Research. Charles Taylor est un des grands penseurs de notre époque. Comme philosophe engagé pour la social-démocratie, beaucoup de son travail est enraciné dans la réalité et les enjeux concrets. In recognition of Charles Taylor's rich legacy, the Charles Taylor Award for Excellence in Policy Research is awarded annually to a researcher whose work has made an important contribution to policy debates relevant to building a more socially just Canada. And as a former staffer, I can attest that policy researchers do not get the love that they deserve, so please, please, please give it up. To introduce this year's winner, please join me in welcoming my fellow board member, Stephanie Kitsis.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to announce this year's recipient of the Charles Taylor Award for Excellence in Policy Research. In recognition of Taylor's legacy, this award is presented annually to a researcher whose work has made a meaningful contribution to public policy debates that advance a more just Canada. This year's recipient is Richard Gilbert. Richard's a journalist and economist whose rigorous research has brought much needed attention to Canada's migrant and foreign worker program. Through a series of comprehensive reports that are commissioned by the Laborers International Union of North America, Richard's analyzed economic, legal, and political impacts of the temporary foreign worker program and the international mobility program. His work has exposed systemic exploitation and modern slavery within sectors like construction, bringing to light issues that have often kept in the shadows. Grounded in data and driven by a commitment to justice, his research continues to shape the federal policy discussions and inspires efforts for legislative reform. So please join me in congratulating Richard Gilbert, this year's recipient of the Charles Taylor Prize.
All right, good morning, everyone. I just want to start by first thanking the Broadbent Institute for awarding me the prestigious Charles Taylor Prize in Policy Research. I'm very proud to receive this award because it brings a lot of attention or shows how relevant this research is and that it's made a contribution to more just Canada. The second people I want to thank for this is LIUNA. It was the Laborers International Union that had supported this research over many years. In particular, I'd like to thank Mark Olson, who is the Western Canada Regional Sub-Manager for LIUNA. I'd also like to thank Kelly Frederick, who's the one who made the submission for this award on my behalf. So thank you very much for LIUNA. was commissioned to do 5 research policy studies for LiUNA from the period of about 2016 to 2022. This policy research was based on my work as a journalist. I worked for 2 construction publications in Canada. One is called the Journal of Commerce. Some of you in Western Canada may be aware of it. It's a construction newspaper that covers the industry in Western Canada. I also worked for another construction publication called the Daily Commercial News and Construction Record, and that publication is Ontario's only daily construction newspaper. It also covers the industry in Eastern Canada. So over a period of, maybe 7 or maybe 8 or 9 years, I actually covered construction as a journalist across Canada. And it's this work that laid the foundation for the policy research that I've undertaken here. The Temporary Foreign Worker Program and the International Mobility Program are the legal framework that the government regulates participation of migrant workers in the economy. The UN defines migrant workers in these programs as indentured laborers, or what we call modern slaves. It's modern slavery. Public debate on this issue has a few different gaps. One gap is that I think intentionally they've tried to not discuss the International Mobility Program. It's not really well known. It's a little known program, but in fact it is the major program for bringing people in the country on a temporary basis. And then there was another gap in the literature, or just in the research on this area, and that was that very little work had been done on the impact of these migrant worker programs on major industrial industries in the country, including construction. So to fill this gap, I wrote a research paper here. I'll hold it up. This is available. You can see this on the LiUNA website and all the other studies, but this is the work that I produced. And this particular piece of work or research was designed to fill that gap. The title of it is the International Mobility Program and the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, Modern Slavery, Economic Cycles, and National Output. So I looked at data from about 2000 to 2020. So I had data for 20 years on this. Now with the election coming up, I think maybe it's important to point out that the Temporary Foreign Worker Program has been increased, and the International Mobility Program have been increased over a period of 20 years. These increases took place under different federal governments, conservative and liberal. If we look at the data, we'll find that it's about 2002 when the number of temporary workers coming into the country surpassed what we would call the economic class, which is the kind of flagship program for the federal government in terms of bringing in permanent residents. So in 2002, the number of temporary workers surpassed the number of permanent workers in the main immigration program that the federal government uses to bring in permanent workers. A few years later, in 2006, temporary foreign workers or migrant workers in the country, temporary migrant workers, exceeded the total number of permanent residents coming in. So that includes students, workers, their families. I mean, every permanent person that was allowed to come in the country, the number of temporary migrant workers surpassed that in 2006. And that's around the time, in the early period, you've got Jean Chrétien, and you've got Paul Martin. Then you've got the election of Stephen Harper. Under Stephen Harper, the number of people coming in increased extremely fast. It was exponential increase. A lot of that had to do with the economic boom we were going through at that time, which was based on production of oil and resource industries. And there was actually a shift in the Canadian economy where there was more economic activity because of the energy sector and resource extraction in Western Canada. The actual center of the Canadian economy shifted to the west. And along with that shift, we had a huge number of migrant workers coming in during that period. Interestingly enough, 2015 election, Justin, sorry. The Liberals said that the problems with the migrant worker programs was representative of the failure of conservative policy in general. So they were quite critical of the problems with the program. You're probably not surprised to find out once the Liberals were elected, they adopted the conservative policy, protected it from criticism, and then expanded it rapidly. So we find that over the period when Liberals were in power, there was a continued increase in that program. And my data here ends in 2020. We've got data up to 2023, and in the last 3 years, there's been a 130% increase in this program. So the increases under the Liberals, they're comparable to what happened under the Harper government, and they may even be a lot more. So I just want to make that point as we go into the upcoming election on April 28th, that you're hearing a lot of talk about who destroyed the immigration program and what are the problems with migrant workers. Just want people to remember that both parties that were in power are responsible for the problems that have happened under this program, and not to really blame, there's enough blame to go around for everybody. So let's not worry about which party is or isn't responsible for this. We just need to make changes. And that's why I'm so happy to be involved with this summit this week. I met a lot of really hardworking social activists and leadership in democratic institutions and in labor unions. And I look forward to continuing to work with you on this important public policy issue as we move forward. So thank you very much.
And now, to join us for a special announcement of the Ellen Meiskens Wood Prize and Lecture, I'd like to welcome to the stage Amy Pang, Dean of Arts at Toronto Metropolitan University.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm thrilled to be here with you at the Broadbent Institute 2025 Progress Summit. As Canada's largest annual gathering focused on progressive politics, the Progress Summit is a vital space for bold ideas and meaningful dialogue. It brings together people committed to finding real solutions to the complex challenges we face today. Toronto Metropolitan University is proud to have a long-standing partnership with the Broadbent Institute. The Institute has been a key supporter of the TMU Democracy Internship. And since 2023, our Faculty of Arts has been honored to host the annual Ellen Meiskens Wood Lecture. The Ellen Meiskens Wood Prize is a prestigious honor recognizing exceptional contributions by academics, labor activists, or writers working in political theory, social economic policy, human rights, or sociology. Presented by the Broadbent Institute, the award celebrates the legacy of Professor Ellen Meiskens Wood, an extraordinary political thinker, historian, and passionate advocate for democracy. It is my honor to announce the recipients of this year's Ellen Meiskens Wood Prize, Grace Blakely. Grace is a staff writer at the Tribune magazine, a former economic commentator for the New Statesman, and a research fellow at the UK's Institute for Public Policy Research. She is a fearless voice in political and economic journalism, offering sharp critiques of modern capitalism and challenging right-wing orthodoxy across UK and international media, including appearances on BBC Question Time and Piers Morgan Uncensored. In the spirit of Alan Mixingwood, Grace confronts the deep inequalities of our current system and pushes us to imagine something better. Her most recent book, Vulture Capitalism, Corporate Crimes, Backdoor Bailouts, and the Death of Freedom, is a powerful call to reclaim our economy from entrenched corporate and political interest. We are excited to welcome Grace to Toronto Metropolitan University next month for the 2025 Alan Mixingwood Lecture. The event is in person on Tuesday, May 20th. Grace's lecture will carry forward Alan's powerful vision for democracy, which she described as nothing more or less than people's power, or even the power of common people or the poor. Last year's lecture featured economist Isabella Weber, whose insight into curbing inflation through price and profit caps are now part of the real policy discussions in the current federal election. This annual lecture is where fresh, impactful, progressive ideas meet the public stage, and is always a thought-provoking, inspiring event. So you don't want to miss it. Tickets for the 2025 Alan Mixing's lecture are now available at the broadbentinstitute.ca, the website. Now, please join me in congratulating Grace Blakely as the recipients of this year's Alan Mixingwood Prize. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Grace Blakely, author of Vulture Capitalism, and I am so excited to announce that I've been awarded the 2025 Alan Mixingwood Prize by the Broadbent Institute. Mixingwood's work, her approach, political Marxism, has been extremely influential on my development as an author and an activist. And her ideas, particularly around the relationship between capitalism and democracy, are central in this book, Vulture Capitalism. And I want to read you a quote just to illustrate how influential her thinking has been on my work. Marxist theorist Alan Mixingwood argues that the separation of the economic and the political is one of the defining features of capitalist ideology. Democracy is permitted in the political realm, within formal state institutions, while it is strictly limited within the economy, within the corporation and the market. The designation of the corporation as an economic institution disguises the forms of private government that obtain within the firm, and the understanding of the state as a political institution insulated from the economy obscures how the exercise of state power is shaped by a process of social struggle in which capital dominates. The fusion of political and economic power in capitalist societies means, Mixingwood argues, that democracy has become synonymous with socialism. To understand socialism in this way, we must accept that the divide between capitalism and socialism isn't defined by technical questions like the operation of the price mechanism, the extent of planning or markets, or even the balance between the public and private sector. These factors are all important in shaping the way that socialist and capitalist societies function, but the difference between the two is far simpler. A capitalist society is a class-divided society in which power is monopolized by capitalists and their allies. A socialist society is a classless society in which power is shared and decisions are made collectively. A socialist society is, then, a true democracy. I'll be discussing these ideas about the divide between capitalist oligarchy and democratic socialism in my acceptance speech for the prize, which will be held on May 20th at 7 p.m. at Toronto Metropolitan University. I hope to see many of you there. We're engaged in a global struggle against a corrupt and unaccountable oligarchy that treats our hard-won democratic rights with disdain while subjecting ordinary people to misery, oppression, and exploitation to line their own pockets. Alan Mixingwood's message of hope, solidarity, and collective power has never been more important.
Hi, folks. Next, we've got a couple of options again for you. In this room, we're diving into a presentation of new polling data from Viewpoints, looking at how Canadians feel about immigration. Then we'll hear from a panel of experts working on the front lines of immigrant and refugee rights, discussing how we push back against fear and build a more inclusive system. Or you can head up to the Grand Salon for Social Media for Social Change, where Jared Walker, I don't know who that guy is sitting down with creators using platforms like TikTok to shift narratives and spark real action. We're going to talk about strategy, reach, and what it means to go viral with purpose. Pick your path, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. Oh, goodness. And please join me in welcoming Jordan Leichnitz.
Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? A little Friday energy there. My name is Jordan Leichnitz, and I'm the Canada Program Manager for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And so that's a lot of words, some of which are German. But those of you are unfamiliar with our work, we're the oldest political foundation in Germany, and we work in over 100 countries around the world with a pretty unique and important mandate, and that's to promote equity, freedom, social justice, and social democracy. And so I'm very pleased to be here today to introduce some new research that we co-authored with the Broadbent Institute. So this report is called Shifting Borders, Canadian Attitudes Towards Immigration. And we partnered for this project because we wanted to better understand how Canadians are thinking and feeling about immigration at a moment when we're seeing some long-standing consensuses about immigration in our country shift. So we know that when housing and healthcare concerns rise, right-wing populists are always looking to exploit the issue and exploit that frustration. And it's more important than ever in these circumstances, especially for those of us who believe that government is a force for good, to understand the nuances behind these changing views, what's driving them, so that we can make a case for a just and inclusive immigration system. So I want to really thank our partners at Viewpoints Research for conducting the survey and the work that underpins this report. They were great to work with, and the insights from James Valke and Natalie Pila are incredibly valuable. So you're going to see that despite some troubling trends, this research reveals some clear opportunities for progressives to lead with smart policy, strong values, and a clear vision for how immigration can build a better future for everybody here in Canada. So thank you very much, and without further ado, I'm going to welcome James and Natalie to the stage to get into the numbers. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Not only am I the Director of Research and Strategy at Viewpoints, I'm also the President and Founder of the Jordan Leichnitz Fan Club. Every morning I get to see her brilliance, her intelligence, and her patience on Cursive Politics. She's really great. Let's give a hand to Jordan for all the work she does. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate this. Viewpoints conducted some research of residents of Canada to explore perceptions on immigration, what messaging works to strengthen public support, and what we can expect from other sides. Canadians have celebrated building a diverse, multicultural society with decades of open immigration policy and multicultural policy that have shaped the country we have today. We wanted to unpack perceptions around how much immigrants are being scapegoated or blamed for current domestic problems. We've seen other public opinion research touch on the topic of immigration, but none that really dug into the nuances of the wide range and different types.
So what we did, in partnership with Broadbent and Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, we ran a national online survey just a couple weeks ago in early March and got around 1,000 responses, weighted them by age, gender, and region to ensure representativeness, and an equivalent random sample for those research folks in the audience is plus or minus 3%. Our first big question in this survey was, generally, what kind of impact do you think immigration has had on Canada? And what we found is that opinion is divided, but skews positive. So nearly half, about 45%, are saying they think that the impact is very good or somewhat good. About a quarter feel neutral. and around 30% think that it has a negative impact. So this suggests a fairly positive view around immigration generally.
And when I talk about previous public opinion polling, these are the kind of questions they ask and then they move on to something else. As we go through the presentation, that wide perspective will narrow down and focus on some of the more specifics and some arguments on that front as well too.
So we found that something is shifting. One of the other questions that we asked in the survey is, in the past year, has your opinion on immigration changed? Half say that it has changed, and half say it stayed the same. A third are saying that, yes, I think it has changed, and I think we should allow less immigration. So this gives us the sense that we see a shift, but we're not looking at a complete shift of opinion, right? Half are saying it stayed the same for them. The sentiment still suggests skewing positive, but things are shifting.
Throughout the survey, we tested arguments around immigration. Specifically, we focused on the topics of housing, public services, and economics are intermingled throughout there as well. When we look at housing, and this slide shows you some of the arguments we tested to get people's perceptions of the agree, strongly disagree. When we look at housing, we tested each argument with participants in a random order, not in the order you see. Here we begin to see some contradictions of opinions. On the bottom bar, we see 70% feel that immigration makes housing harder to find and more expensive.
But at the same time, if you look at the bar right above that, you see an argument we tested that says that Canada needs more doctors, home building professionals, and nurses. We need the country to welcome as many immigrants from those professions as possible. And around the same percentage are agreeing with that statement, agreeing that skilled folks are needed to fix economic problems in housing. People are supportive of immigrants needed for that work.
And while the contradictions may seem odd, to our mind, and what research has shown us, is that it reflects a bigger concern about housing in general.
We also see a similar issue with public service strain, where people are both responding to the survey and sharing their opinions in ways that suggest they see immigration as both the problem and the solution. In that bottom bar, we see 63% feel that immigration adds to public service strain. But again, pointing to that argument above it, a similar amount recognize that skilled professional immigrants are needed for keeping healthcare and other social services sustainable. And above that, you see, again, similar percentages agreeing with arguments around immigration supporting economic growth and that immigrants and refugees are being unfairly scapegoated.
Now, on the question of economic sustainability, we see contradictions once again. The top two bars, over half think immigration supports economic growth and that the temporary foreign worker program has been exploited. These seem as though they're contradictions in your mind, but this is what the data shows us.
Yeah, at the same time, again, that bottom argument, a similar amount are also thinking that immigration pushes wages lower, creates more competition for jobs. So we keep seeing this come up in all of these different areas that we talked about in our survey, where people are pointing to immigration as the problem, but also the solution.
Yeah, so you're thinking, okay, James and Natalie, what are we gonna do with these contradictions? How do you account for these mixed results? And I would say that's a brilliant question. And that's why we explored people's perceptions of different types of immigration. That's where we can see some of these nuances peel out. Now, before we dive too deep into this, it must be said that, as our Taylor Award winner mentioned, the immigration system has changed a lot over the last years, especially over the last 2 decades. It is not what it looked like in the 1970s and certainly not what it looked like in the 1980s. And I expect our panel, who will be speaking after us, will dig into some of that perception as well too. But we wanted to explore perceptions of different types of immigrations today, and that's what this question achieves.
Yeah, so we had asked people if the government were to have to prioritize different types of immigration, how should they prioritize it? And by far, people put highest priority. They're most interested in immigration when it involves workers with specialized skills in high-demand fields. So if you're looking at that top bar, you see that by a large margin, the highest priority being on folks with skills in high-demand fields like healthcare, engineering, and technology. And at the bottom, you see the least prioritized, mentioning temporary foreign workers, investors and entrepreneurs, and international students, so more temporary forms of immigration. So to us, this suggests that people are not looking for an end to immigration, but a desire or a focus for the system to fulfill economic objectives, to support the development of a strong and prosperous economy. And these findings, to us, complicate the narrative that we've started to hear that Canada is becoming less welcoming to immigrants. What it suggests to us is that folks are feeling economic pressures across the board, and the appetite right now is for reform, not restriction. People still see immigration as a valuable part, a strong and valuable part of Canada's society.
And it also explains, if you cast your mind back to January 2024, when the federal government made a big announcement to cut student visas by 35%. That's kind of a large announcement, and there was almost no pushback from the political parties. There was no pushback from the Canadian public. So reform is in the offing, and they took, that sentiment for reform is out there, and there are steps being taken to address that seem to gather consensus.
But of course, like with every survey, these results are a snapshot. What we found, though, echoes things that we've heard from folks in focus groups over the last couple of months. People are so focused on housing affordability, healthcare system quality, and above all, cost of living. It's what we hear all the time.
Yeah, and when I can tell you anecdotally, over the last 18 months in focus groups, whenever people have brought up the issue of immigration, it has never been immigration is bad, we need to stop it. The sentence goes, there's something wrong with your immigration system because we're having such housing crisis, because we're having such public service crisis. There is a mindset of scarcity. Again, it's never we need to stop immigration. It's almost never we need to stop immigration. It's about shifting the way things are prioritized right now.
So I think we have a little bit more time. We regularly wouldn't add some crosstab analysis in our presentation, but since we have a bit of time, we thought we should share some findings that would be of interest to folks in the audience. We've got a few significant differences between groups with certain characteristics. So we're looking at, on the left side, you'll see folks who are currently members of labor unions. That was one of the questions we asked. And as well, how familiar people are with the immigration process. So these are not the only ones that we found interesting. You can definitely find more details and more findings from this research, a more fulsome overview on the Broadbent website, but this just gives you a little bit of a taste of some of the differences that we found. And again, for research folks in the audience, the smallest of these groups, which was 250 respondents, the margin of error on that is plus or minus 6%.
19 times out of 20.
19 times out of 20. So the first one we're going to show you, we looked at the perceptions of immigration, so that big general question we talked about up front, and looked at that by those who are union members and who are not, and then the other question about people's familiarity with immigration. And we found that union members and those who are more familiar have positive perceptions of immigration to a greater extent than their counterparts. So union members, more positive perceptions, and same for those as people become more familiar with the immigration process, they're more likely to have positive perceptions of immigration generally.
Yeah, I'm going to linger on this slide a little bit. Those very good perceptions at 25% on the top and 34% on the bottom are really people that connect with this issue and feel very strongly. We ask these questions, somewhat good or very good, and the very goods indicate a strong affinity towards this.
The other one we'll briefly show you is that we looked at some of these more positive arguments around immigration. So immigration grows the workforce, keeps our social programs sustainable, and immigration supports economic growth by filling labor shortages in key industries. And here we're just looking at the variable about unionization, so those who are unionized and those who are not. And those who are more likely to agree with these statements about immigration, that it grows the workforce and supports economic growth.
Okay, we got into some detail about how different segments of the population there fit, but there's so much more we didn't have time to get into today. For more information, and Clement will talk about this, there's going to be a report on the Broadbent website with much more detailed information. We could literally talk about this for 4 hours. But we have a little bit of time so we can move on to the panel. Natalie and I will be around for most of the day to answer any questions if you spot us. On behalf of Viewpoints, I do want to thank the Broadbent Foundation and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Institute for their investment and their partnership. Clem and Jordan have been wonderful partners through this. We wouldn't want it for anybody else. And we want to thank you for your attention and your time today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
For more discussion on this topic, please welcome to the stage Pablo Godoy, UFCW Canada's Regional Director for Ontario and Director of Emerging Sectors. Matthias Ecke, Member of European Parliament, Gary Srinivasan, Co-Executive Director of the Canadian Council for Refugees, and Clement Nokos, Director of Policy and Engagement at the Broadbent Institute.
Good morning. Nice to see everyone here for a policy discussion, the first thing. And yes, like my colleagues at Viewpoints Research said, you can find our new report on the Broadbent Institute website, broadbentinstitute.ca/research. It's actually a really nice new website, in case you haven't noticed. And we present all of the findings that you saw today with really clean data visualizations, very interactive. You can isolate things, you can download that data as well for your own analysis. And so to start, from these findings, there is a clear shift happening in immigration attitudes, and from what we can also see from these trends in the new report, Shifting Borders, that sentiments of approval for immigration were growing for decades. We celebrated Canada's diversity and saw the economic value of immigration, and this was unique among other Western countries with immigration. You can see it in Table 1 of this report, where Canada's trends in alignment with countries like Germany, the United States, and the UK are higher in approval for immigration. But we also see in Table 3, Chart 3 in the introduction, this decline kind of start just a few years ago. Why, in your view, are we seeing these new trends? And I'll start with Gary.
Thank you very much. Oh, you were right. He said you won't have to touch a button. Good morning, everyone. A big thank you to the Progress Summit for inviting the Canadian Council for Refugees to be with you all this morning. I've been really inspired by many of you over the last couple of days. Yeah, the data is super interesting. Thanks for doing that. So why are we seeing these new trends? Definitely true that Canadian opinion is changing with respect to immigration. My main comment is that outcome relates to the fact that Canadians have been relentlessly fed messaging over the last couple of years that immigration in recent years is the cause of significant crises that have actually been decades in the making. So it has been a very effective narrative, but it actually is kind of bogus arguments. I think the important thing to underscore in that is that the crises themselves are real. We have a real housing crisis. We have a real absence of access to decent work. We are seeing real crises in access to healthcare. But even if you look just at the housing crisis, housing experts will tell you that there is no meaningful correlation between increases in immigration and the skyrocketing, like 300% increases in house prices. Migrants, refugees, and international students have been particularly scapegoated because they have the most precarious status. They were the easiest cause of the fake cause of the crisis to throw under the bus. And they are those at the margins of our society who are experiencing the housing crisis. They are not causing it. The impact of their presence in Canada has nothing to do with the levers of policy that actually affect whether rent control happens or doesn't happen, how we do or don't invest in social housing, or how housing is financialized. So we have a significant impact with Canadians being explained who has caused these crises, and we are seeing as a result some of these attitudes change. But I thought what was so important in the study was that is the system broken? There's been no fundamental shifts. Canadians are still largely quite positive on immigration. And what really has happened is there's been a failure in our ability to actually provide an alternative explanation for what is happening to these crises, to meet people where they're at and give them an answer to expose the real villains who are accountable, those really with power who are accountable for the cause of these crises. And we haven't been able to engage them with an alternative narrative to explain that and to then continue to build from a values-based way on their ongoing support for immigration. And I can get into that a bit later.
And Pablo, I mean, we've also spoken about immigration as an issue last fall, the Perspectives Journal podcast, your views on things like the temporary foreign worker program, and you also see in Table 2 in the introduction, the explosion in the past 10 years of that immigration pathway. It's not really immigration, it's a temporary foreign worker program. The explosion in population of that particular sector, maybe, in your view, is that a contribution to some of the trends we're seeing in perceptions to immigration?
Thanks, Clement. I think it's a great question. First, I want to say thank you to the Broadbent Institute, first of all, for commissioning the report and the research on this important topic. I would say that I think when we talk about Canada's immigration legacy, it's important to ground it in its reality, which is that Canada has always had a colonial, prejudiced, racist approach to immigration, one that privileged certain people from certain places and one that underprivileges others, and usually that's based on gendered, racialized categorization of who should be able to stay and who shouldn't, right? I think when we think about the temporary foreign worker programs, those were programs that were created decades ago under this guise of being temporary programs, but they've been permanent staples of Canada's history and legacy. And so when I think about today's moment and how we scapegoat or how we point to immigrants, migrants, people that may be under or undocumented, I feel like it only continues the legacy of this, like who should be able to stay, who has access to status, who should be able to participate fully in our economy, in our communities versus those that shouldn't. I guess what has changed is today we're connected in a way that perhaps we haven't been in the past with social media, with media and whatnot, and so it's easy to bombard us with these messages. But I think it's important to call it out for what it is, right? We've created these programs that, have preferred to bring in cheap, vulnerable, precarious, expendable labor, and preferred that model. We've also given the immigration system, in many ways, we've handed over the reins to employers, to industry, to people that are profit-driven, and so it's not a surprise to think that whether it's international students, whether it's temporary foreign workers, that these numbers of people that come in have skyrocketed because employers are seeing them as a means to bring in that labor, right? And so I always like to point to 2009 as a very interesting moment in our history. It was the first year ever that the number of people that entered Canada temporarily surpassed the number of people that could actually stay. And so it's kind of like the line in the sand type moment. But the reality is our programs that bring in cheap, vulnerable, expendable labor has been a reality for the last 200 years, if not beyond that in Canada. And so today, what's happening is that there's this rhetoric of people that primarily can't access social services as being the drain on our social services, when really the reality is that they're contributing the most and actually being legislated out of ever being able to receive that benefit. When it comes to the housing crisis, folks that are generally having the hardest time accessing housing are the ones that are being scapegoated as if they're the ones creating this crisis. And so it's important to say like that actually continues a legacy of scapegoating, of xenophobia, of saying who should or shouldn't be part of our society. I think that on top of that, I think that there's a conversation that's often missing when we think about legislative changes that affect so many people. So there was a change that affected almost 775,000 people that didn't have full status, and so people that were either waiting for status, were waiting to receive permanent residency, people that were temporary foreign workers that had access to pathways to status, and the government just pulled the rug from underneath them, right? And so the conversation that's often missing is this conversation on the real impact on people when we have legislative changes around immigration, how it displaces people. Our immigration system also depends on like the vulnerability of the push and pull factors that sometimes we create in other countries. So I always love to start where I'm from. I was born in Guatemala, and the Canadian mining corporations have a legacy of extractionism in these places. So they're displacing violently and criminally many communities, many Indigenous communities, and then also coming in and saying, well, as a result of that, we can bring you to Canada under temporary foreign worker programs, bring you here. So we're not only extracting resources, but we're extracting you from your native land, coming to Canada to do work under this regime that is often very, creates vulnerability, precarity, that's very exploitative. And then we're going to further scapegoat you and treat you as the problem or the issue whenever there's issues politically. And so, unfortunately, at this moment that we're living this incredibly precarious or I guess interesting time or different time politically, the scapegoat has been immigrants, has been migrant workers, has been folks that actually should be supported. People that need access to services are the ones that actually be pointing to and being displaced. And so I think it's important as people living in Canada that we recognize that while we can point to politicians in the US and we can say that, you know, they have this legacy of deportation and this legacy of strengthening their borders and how they police migrants or immigrants, I think it's important to say, like, we actually have that same legacy here in Canada. And when it's convenient, we celebrate it. And when it's not, we denounce folks that are under status or don't have status.
Thank you for that. And Matthias, you know, coming from Germany, I know in Germany we're seeing the rise of the Alternative für Deutschland. Just the other day I saw the polls, you know, this far-right anti-immigrant party rose above the Christian Democrats after the February federal election. Could you speak to maybe why that trend is happening? And is this something, you know, you've only been in Canada for like a few days. It's too cold for Matthias, apparently. But have you seen, you know, despite the weather, these parallels in Canada? Maybe that's something, you know, what's happening in Germany. Is that Canada's future?
Well, hopefully not. Well, thank you for having me here and discuss this topic. I think that we should not mix it up too much. There is a debate on policy, on migration, on asylum seekers in Europe, which is an important part of the debate on migration. And on the other hand, we have a lot of factors contributing to the rise of the far right. Basically, cost of living crisis, insecurity, the war we face in the east of Europe, and all the insecurities it brings. But of course, the far right are exploiting anti-migrant sentiments, and they are, well, maybe they are successful in that also because our system of migration needs to be fixed because it's really lacks consistency, and it is, to be honest, it's toxic to talk about migration in a moment in Germany, because on the one hand, everyone knows who's like clearly minded that we need more immigration in Germany. Germany is a relatively old country, so we will have a lot of labor force going out of the labor market in their pensions and so on. And they're like, according to statistics, probably one would need to have 400, 500,000 people every year come in net influx, in so to speak, just to have a stable workforce. So on the other hand, there's a discourse on that we have too many migrants in Germany, so which is not only far right, of course they are extremely pushing that, but it goes until like center parties, and it's also pushed very much from the center right, which will now have the chancellor again, and this has to do something with some kind of exceptional circumstances. There was, as you probably know, quite a substantial wave of refugees, asylum seekers from the Middle East, from Syria especially, and Iraq in 2015, 2016. And also it continued in a way because of the civil war in Syria. And then, of course, the war in Ukraine also led to a lot of people that had to flee their homes, and they moved to the European Union, to Poland and to Germany mainly. So there were, like, objectively many people seeking refuge in my country and in the European Union. And in some years it were up to 1 million people, which is, even with a country that works pretty well, it is substantial. On the other hand, we were really bad at integrating people into our society, because our general system on asylum seekers means if you are an asylum seeker, you're kind of put on hold. Yeah, you have to wait until your file is decided upon. So you can't work, you can't move to where you want to, you have to stay in like kind of shelters, and you can't integrate into society. And this, of course, also contributes that it's very, very difficult for newcomers to like do their way into society, to contribute, to make all these things that as a newcomer you actually want to. So they are excluded, and then everyone complains about them not being included. And on the other hand, we had a reform on like skilled labor immigration, which actually changed our system more in a direction from the Canadian system. We had a discourse, also a debate on how the Canadian system, it's so interesting. This came more from the right, to be honest, than from the left, because they discussed it in a way that we kind of replace refugees with like skilled migrants in the way the Canadians do, which of course it's very, very strange thing to do, and of course completely ignores the difference between our countries. So in the moment, we've been progressing on migration policy, like policy-wise, but the debate is very toxic.
Now, to Gary's point, because you mentioned refugees, and when I was studying at our alma mater, the Heritage School, back in 2015, that was the topic, this Vluchtelingspolitik and the Willkommenskultur. It's like, it was dominating German news and just the conversations I was even having among my classmates. But, Gary, as you do work on refugee policy, is there, a certain view, maybe, Canada has this history of welcoming refugees as well, but you also saw in the statistics, refugees have been deprioritized. Is that a cause for concern?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. We are seeing, and just kind of building on Pablo's point, we have actually a sort of an important thing that we can build on as movements, which is a high in principle regard or thought that Canada is a refugee leader. But what I was thinking about when you were speaking, Matthias, is really how difficult it is to ever compare what is happening in Germany or so many other countries in the world to what is happening in Canada, because we just have fundamentally different geopolitical context. Canada is bordered by 3 sides on oceans. We actually receive a tiny drop of those who are seeking refuge and protection compared to so many other countries. Germany is a strong example, but when we think about countries in the south, I don't know actually how Canada attends international forum and holds its head up at all when it, in front of Turkey or Lebanon, Colombia. These are countries that have stepped up in a much more important way to address their international responsibilities with respect to a global phenomenon of forced displacement and violence, which we contribute to, both through our extractive industries and through our foreign policy in the context of causes of war and extreme poverty and inequality around the world. I guess there's a couple of key points I wanted to make. One is that this tendency that we have had in Canada to identify who can we blame for this. There is nothing new about the most recent, this most recent phenomenon that we're seeing with respect to refugee claimants. When we had people at the border that were barely kind of 40,000 coming through that Roxham Road, you had the Premier of Quebec in an emergency screaming about the incapacity of services in Quebec to absorb, to address, when in fact we're actually highly skilled in Canada at resettling refugees. We do a good job of providing support and settlement services to this very small number of refugees we resettle. But somehow when refugees arrive this way, we know exactly what to do. But when refugees arrive this way, we're completely, flummoxed. But it's really because it's just a political pawn. It's a way to not take accountability for a failure to invest in key resources. I think just coming back to the Broadbent study, when we think about kind of what do we do with this? Because in fact, we have a lot of policy solutions. We know what we need to do. The system, we have never had a fair and just inclusive immigration system. It has been marked by racism, by classism, and by a fairly meager, a lack of real leadership and generosity in many ways in terms of refugees. So there's a lot of key areas with respect to granting permanent residence pathways, ending closed work permits, and a whole concept of indentured labor that keep workers vulnerable. 100% we have to eliminate the Safe Third Country Agreement with the US and defend the right to asylum. We currently are, both the Prime Minister and leaders of political parties are seeing people fleeing unbelievable danger in a state of lawlessness in the US, where the right to asylum has been completely shut down, and saying it's appropriate to send them back to the US because it's a safe system. So we need to end the STCA entirely. And we have a lot of ideas about important ways to address the essential racism and marginalization that's created through the temporary foreign worker program. But what we need to do is to create the political space again for the reforms that we know are needed, and to find ways to, in fact, reopen immigration levels that are essential to Canada's future and thriving, because we are also not just an aging population, we are a shrinking population. And you can see there is that middle that flip-flops so easily from your study. So I have my notes here because I couldn't always remember the numbers, but this fascinating figure, 62% of Canadians think immigration enriches our culture and social diversity and serves our economy. Guess what number think? Oh, 62% also agree that, but diversity is a challenging issue. So you have a middle that is open to being moved. Like, they're looking for political leadership in a little bit, for like, so which way do we need to go? How does immigration serve Canadian needs or not? And I think that the important thing that we need to think about is, who do we mobilize and how do we connect with that mushy middle? And the data that shows how, for example, unionized workers have far more open attitudes towards immigration. I'm going to do a little ad pitch here because we're really keen for other sectors to join us, but the Canadian Council for Refugees, with other partners, we are actually, because we have been concerned about our inability, let alone all other partners, to effectively present the alternative narrative that engages Canadians to pull that middle. We are working on a messaging campaign with Anat Shaker-Osorio. We're working with Ecos Research to actually, in a data way, like testing through actually working on what messages will appeal to our base. The focus for us in a messaging campaign is to mobilize the base that we know is there to do it, and let them, in decentralized way, meeting people where they're at, engage the middle, rather than dilute positions to sort of try and guess where the middle is and change what we actually know are the important reforms needed for immigration. There is an incredible, powerful conversation that we can have with Canadians from all different backgrounds. With, someone was talking about that yesterday, like tailored to who you're talking to in the moment. But we do need to build our muscle better at thinking, not talking on the frame, not having the conversation our opponents want to have, because that middle, that 62% that goes this way or that way, when we have the conversation about, in the negative frame, refugees are not security threats, or migrants are not causing the housing crisis, we almost never can win convincing people to address those fears, because the right is always better at fomenting the fear than we are at assuaging it. So the key is for us to think about a positive frame that engages that middle that is actually quite open, and where we still have, because we're not yet Germany, have actually a fairly strong basis to rebuild kind of confidence in a strong and open immigration system, while to create the political space to then address the policies that are actually quite racist and closed and need a lot of work. So we have already some support. CUPE has signed on, CAUT has signed on, we have the churches that have signed on, some of the settlement sectors, but we know we are stronger together. We know that these issues are interconnected, and so we're really keen both for people to kind of join us within this commitment when the messaging, the sort of data will go in the field shortly, so this is like a post-election effort. Really keen to think about other sectors that are interested to join with CCR in a positive value-based campaign that can engage people from a hopeful frame about what we need to do to build that country that we want, to build the future that we want, and to do it not just through digital messaging, but actually through strong organizing as well. And not by diluting what our message is, but by addressing the base that we know is quite there and ready to activate. But it will take effort because we have to, I think, stop fighting the opponent's battles and find a place of a much firmer footing to engage Canadians. The tiny example I want to give, if you give me one more second, because just an example of leadership that's possible, because I've been so discouraged by so much of the political messaging that's out there. But I don't know if you guys remember, we've had such a, let me finish that sentence. Remember when Manitoba welcomed Palestinian refugee children? So this was in a context where we had almost every leader speaking in a high security frame about the threats, and we're not so sure. It was, I mean, it still remains to this day an unacceptable a program to supposedly bring Palestinians to safety from Gaza that almost no one can have access to because we still are explaining to Canadians, rather than the positive frame that we did with the Syrian campaign or the 300,000 Ukrainians that we signaled, Canada, these people are fleeing persecution, it's time to step up. Canadians did it across the country. In the Palestinian context, the frame has been security, but Wab, the Premier of Manitoba, greets two Palestinian children and he says to the people of Manitoba, this is who we have always been. We have always been the people who stand up in times of conflict and famine to help the innocent. I want to plant the flag on the notion that our province and our country can be a beacon of human rights. He actually invoked Every Child Matters, and he said, let us set out 2 more places at our table at the Manitoba family. And not just Manitobans, but I know so many Canadians were like, oh, like, where's that? That's where I want to go. So we have work to do, but we can get there.
Thank you for also noting in the data that major inconsistency, because a version of this report had the word contradictions. In the title, we revised it, but no, that's very prevalent throughout. You'll find data points that don't quite make a lot of sense. There's these inconsistencies. But you know, what I try to get at in this report is that I think there is, you know, this stated objective of immigration policy from the 1976 Immigration Act. You know, that was complemented by our the multiculturalism embedded in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so this complementarity, I think, is what lends us to, you know, you see in the statistics, oh, we have high respect still for multiculturalism despite immigration attitudes going that way. But that's where I, you know, kind of make the inference that it's a matter of disagreement with immigration policy rather than immigrants themselves. But there's still clearly a problem. And, you know, Pablo, you work very much on the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. And again, in the report, you see it's exploded versus the regular economic stream of immigration that's been the prevalent intention. That was the intention of this act in creating the refugee stream, the family reunification stream, and the point system that we know today. But I also know from my own experience that I have many relatives who are stuck in this point system. I also know a lot of them in this precarious temporary foreign worker situation because it's sold as something of an immigration stream. But Pablo, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, you know, is this a framework that can be fixed? Should it be, you know, sometimes you hear in this summit, like the Temporary Foreign Workers Program should be abolished. What, in your view, should happen next?
I think there's a lot that should happen next, but I think we got to root whatever changes that happen from like a human rights perspective, and actually, you know, I guess appreciate the fact that what I was saying earlier was that legislative changes have a real impact on people's lives, right? And so I think when we talk about regularization, which was a topic that Trudeau introduced, I guess in 2021, was talking about wanting to regularize over 500,000 people in Canada that are understatused or undocumented, and then abandon that, right, given the political moment, and it wasn't, I guess, convenient to continue that conversation. But historically, changes to any programs or any type of immigration policies have happened without people's voices at the table. One of the examples we like to give at UFCW, we've been working on migrant worker issues for the last 30 plus years, and every single year the Mexican government gets together with the Canadian government to evaluate and renegotiate the seasonal agricultural workers program. Up until last year, there had never been the presence of a labor union or labor rights advocacy groups or workers themselves. And yet, over the last just decade, you would have seen a litany of changes to these temporary foreign worker programs, including the seasonal agriculture worker program, that speak to how people access work, where they go to work, their working conditions, or the contracts that are tied to a single employer. And so yearly, these entities get together to decide how it is that we're gonna change these programs or manipulate these programs in a way that's usually beneficial for industry or companies, but we do not invite, we do not analyze, or we do not care as a nation for the real impact these changes have on the people that are actually doing the work. A good example is the recent changes that were announced before Trudeau left office are going to reduce the number of temporary foreign workers in Canada, are going to change certain industries from 2-year contracts to 1-year contracts. And on its face, we can say, what's the difference, right? But the real impact is that every single one of those temporary foreign workers will have to now apply yearly, might have to seek out recruiters yearly. And for those that don't know, people that are in the Global South and that are involved in these programs often take out mortgage-sized loans to be able to access these programs, mostly because they're being promised some type of pathway to citizenship or some ability to make money that they might not be able to make in their native countries. And yet they're being sold this bill of goods and arriving only to face what the UN rapporteur has recently defined as the circumstances that allow for or mirror indentured servitude, right? And so what has to change is we have to have a human rights approach. If we're talking about a multicultural, inclusive, diverse society that Canada loves to brand itself as, then those principles have to be enacted when we talk about the changes to our immigration system. We have to talk about how temporary foreign workers, the migrant worker programs, quite literally are created to create 2 tiers in our society. Those that have access to staying and those that don't. And they've been treated permanently as a temporary source of labor, but they've been a staple of our society, literally picking, packaging, processing, serving the food that we eat, taking care of our loved ones, working in our hospitals, in our home care facilities, taking care of our children, and yet being told that you're good enough to work here, but you're just not good enough to stay. And so the policy has to change. It has to be one that if we're talking about a society that's inclusive or that celebrates multiculturalism, then racialized folks that traditionally have been unable to access status should be given access to status, right? Whether that's done through what we've been able to do, which is negotiate status or access to status through our collective bargaining agreements. And I think that's something that often isn't necessarily seen as a pathway to status, but what we've been able to do in many of our meatpacking facilities is negotiate with employers that if workers are here for 2 years and they've been working with you, they've been union members, they should have access to status and being able to stay. And so what I think yesterday was spoken on one of the panels is like, as unions, as progressives, we can definitely and should be pushing for progressive legislation. But in the interim, we need to be able to do whatever possible in our own spaces, in our own places, to grant people that access or to support folks that are precarious or vulnerable. And so there's different avenues in which we can do this, but certainly what has to change is this idea that employers and industry should dictate the amounts or the people that come in or are able to stay or not stay. I think that's highly problematic. I think we also have to shift this narrative of who merits to stay, because things like the point system were a way of hiding how we prefer who comes in, right? It wasn't necessarily to do away with our preferential treatment. It was to say that we want a certain type of person from a certain place that has certain English skills or whatever it might have been to fulfill these quote unquote supposed labor shortages. And a lot of the labor shortages traditionally have been created by industry, right? To say that we have these shortages, rather than pay good wages and provide good working conditions so that people want to work in these type of jobs, what we do is we allow industry to create shitty conditions where they underpay, where there's dangerous, deadly work to be done, and say, hey, nobody else wants to do it, so I guess we should go in and grab temporary foreign workers to fill these labor shortages, right? And so that narrative has to be changed, right? The problem is that we've granted way too much power to industry, and industry is dictating these realities. And so I think when we say what has to change, there's a whole litany of things that have to, right? One, we need to to lessen the power that industry has to dictate these terms. Why do you have any real meaningful say on our immigration policy or who gets to enter the country? That's problematic. But we also need to center any changes around the actual voices, lived experiences, the realities that migrant workers are facing, right? And so when we see changes, like I think that Stephen Harper introduced this 4 years in, 4 year out program, which displaced workers, and then they rebuked that and said we need another approach, and so we increased the amount, or the expedited how people could access temporary foreign workers by creating I think they called it the ELMO, the Expedited Labor Market Impact Assessments, so that employers could quickly access workers. And so you're like, these changes we make are about industry having access to people, but they're seldom made on a way that says, how do the human beings who are impacted by these policies, how do we expedite their access to rights, their access to residency, their access to dignity, right? And I think that framework has to be fundamentally shifted, so that when we talk about any other changes, it's based and centered around people first.
Thank you for that. No. And Matthias, going a bit off script here, but I want to take us back to Germany. And in Berlin, you had something similar to a temporary foreign worker program. In a way, the Gastarbeiter program that brought a lot of people from places like Turkey to live in Germany to work. And in Kreuzberg, at Cottbusser Tor, you have this public housing. You can see it, it's very visible, it's very notable architecture, and that is all populated by German guest workers. But it's still populated by Turkish guest workers that came decades ago. They're not exactly guest workers anymore, they're there to stay. And there's been this social exclusion, and then you also continue on with new refugee policy with every wave of refugee crises that hits Germany. And more recently then, in around 2015, you can see in Tempelhofer Feld, that's where Syrian refugees were housed around makeshift prefabricated homes. There's still a bit of a housing solution there to house the refugees, to house guest workers. And in Canada, we had, at the Broadbent Institute's Progress Summit last year, a conversation about getting government back into the business of building housing. We wrote all of this about it, and Mark Hardy's saying this again and again today. But all that to say, it seems like in Germany there has been this housing policy that also complemented newcomers and the waves that they came. Could you maybe speak to how that maybe even contributed to the welcoming culture that accompanied the Syrian refugee crisis? It was 1 million refugees, and Angela Merkel was praised for that. But you're also housing 1 million people really, really fast. Is that maybe what enabled some of that welcoming culture, this social harmony in the first place, given that crisis?
Well, in the beginning of that so-called refugee crisis, or like in the summer of migration that others say in 2015, there was a very high, like a very positive sentiment in the population, that they wanted to be helpful, they wanted to be welcoming, and that they wanted to make impossible things possible. In a broad spectrum of society, not only like among traditionally left and liberal people, but also within conservatives, and it was quite encouraging. And also this very famous statement of Angela Merkel, she said, we can make it, so wir schaffen das. There was something that reflected this state of mind, but it decreased, and it did so also because we did not, like, what is in English, we did not live up to our words. Yeah? We did not provide the public services that are necessary to support newcomers. We did not invest in housing. We did not invest in education as much as is needed. If you have so many new children coming, we did not invest enough also in like language programs and so on. We did invest, but not enough. And in terms of housing, the point is segregation, obviously, was what you mentioned, that it did not work to integrate newcomers into society properly. But I think we have to distinguish between what you mentioned, this Gastarbeiter schemes, which were in the west of Germany, which is also important to mention, in the 70s. I come from the east of Germany, like the former communist part, and there was a very, very restrictive, to put it mildly, migration policy, only among the Eastern Bloc countries. We had some like brother countries, and the migrant workers from there were strictly segregated from society in very cruel ways. So they, when women workers became pregnant, they were sent back, and those kind of really cruel things. And in West Germany, it was not that bad, but it still was very segregated approach. And it was all, the general idea was, okay, they come and they leave again. And and this was reflected in a lot of issues, from our segregated schooling system to housing. And there really needs to be a change on the general, like if you provide universal public services that are good, that are well functioning, in the right amount, then you, in the same time, also lift the level of society to deal with heterogeneity. Yeah? And this did not really happen as much as we wanted. And then what happened next is what you said also about the Canadian situation, was scapegoating. Yeah, it's yeah, okay, we have too many refugees, so my children can't have like physical education in school because the sports hall is needed to shelter refugees, so it's their fault. And so I have a hard time finding an appointment for the doctors because all the refugees go to the doctors, their fault. And then we had discussion about, should we exclude them from some public services? And to some point it happened. For example, there was a change from like minimum support schemes for refugees, that they are not in cash now anymore, but they only get like specific goods, yeah, that they can, or like with a kind of a credit card, they can buy specific goods in the supermarket, so it's completely discriminatory. So they cannot really decide on their own what they want to buy and so on, those kind of things. So I think a society that we shouldn't neglect the challenge that refugees in this kind of volume that do pose some challenges for societies, but a society that is well prepared, that has well-working universal public services and housing, is much better prepared for those kind of challenges. And then you see also the upsides of newcomers much more easily and faster, and this changes also society's attitude towards it. So it is about the capacity, it is about public services.
Yes.
Well, I just want to jump on that because I'm listening. It's, again, the parallels are so not there. It's really so different. There is so much about the German experience with holding people in detention centers and segregated kind of housing that we would never want to replicate in Canada, but we have still never, ever been tested with any of these kinds of numbers. But we have actually, quite an incredible experience to build on. So we have a very racist past of how we've addressed migrant workers, but we actually have some very strong traditions of how we have integrated refugees. We have a private sponsorship refugee program where Canadians actually, and often it's family members, so people in Canada who are supporting and accompanying refugees in communities. And we know that community-based support is absolutely critical. So the struggle that we're having now is very much one of how do we ensure, in general, affordable, accessible housing for a whole range of low-income people in Canada, which would include newcomers and refugees, but many other populations. And we need to create that service in a kind of we need to create that housing in an integrated, universal way across our communities. And the particular needs that refugee claimants have when they arrive do need dedicated support. We have all the models that we know how to do it. We've done it very poorly in Canada, where we, instead of being ready, we are just constantly surprised, and we bus people around at last minute and we put them in hotels. Refugee claimants have very specific legal needs. They often have come out of traumatic experiences and they need support. But we know from the kind of solutions that have been born from communities and civil society organizations, we know how to do it in very cost-effective ways that are not about segregating people, either in large separated housing or detention centers or in hotels, but actually through reception centers located locally in communities that have a very short transition period for people to actually be connected to their work permit and be on their way to find housing. So then the struggles that they find are the ones that all other people face. How do we just, in general, increase the stock of affordable, available housing? But we are so far from the numbers that would challenge our ability to do that, and we have such a strong experience in community models that know how to do it. We actually, the only bright light recently from the last budget, we actually had dedicated 1.1 billion in investment in the federal budget for refugee claimant housing, and now the challenge is identifying communities and provinces that are willing to step up to build just reception centers so people are triaged, receive the legal aid support they need. We need investments in legal aid, and then find themselves in community and on their way, so they are not actually segregated. So again, I feel like there is a lot on the solution side. We kind of know what's needed. We know how to do it from a rights-based and dignity perspective, but we have to create the context that political leaders feel there's permission for that. I'm just listening to Pablo. I mean, who in listening to Pablo wouldn't just sign up for everything he's saying? So we need to either just, you know, replicate Pablo a million times, or we need to train ourselves. We actually need to get support in the information and messaging that can connect with people to tap what we know is there, which is still generally, I think, people in Canada's ability and understanding to focus on, let's hold accountable those who are actually accountable for some of these problems, call for the policy change we need, and send the signal that we actually want to continue, we want to be welcoming societies, and facing some of the hard truths about the ways that we actually absolutely, you know, haven't been. And so that training is what we're keen to get into. How do we not just develop kind of messaging frames to talk to people in real ways, but train ourselves to do it in a way that is right-centered and dignity-centered, so that brings people to where we want them to be, so we can get the kind of legislative reforms and fundamental structural reforms of the programs that are needed.
Thank you for that. And just one more question to Pablo, and then I'll ask a final question. But I want you to chime in on the situation with housing. Also, in our survey, we asked are immigrants, you know, responsible for the healthcare crisis we're also facing. Maybe if you want to speak on, you know, is immigration the cause or maybe the solution to the housing and healthcare issues Canadians everywhere are facing?
Yeah, I guess I'd say that definitely not the cause of, in any way, shape, or form of the crisis. Usually folks that are having difficulty accessing status or that come either as asylum seekers, as refugees, as temporary foreign workers, or international students, their data suggests that they're the ones having the most difficulty accessing these things. And so to suggest in any way, shape, or form that they may be contributing to the problems that exist, I'd go back to the previous answer, which was these are manufactured crises, right? So when we talk about the crisis in healthcare, really these are manufactured crises. If we look at Ontario, what we have is a government that chooses to underfund these services and then use the underfunding, the crisis that is created by underfunding these services as a reason for which we need to look at private healthcare as a solution, right? And that's just manufactured so that the solution can be this profit-driven entities rather than continuing to fund socially universal programs that are meant to service everybody, right? And so what we have is this idea that folks that have a difficulty accessing these services as the problem as to why these services aren't necessarily well funded, which is a ridiculous notion. One of the examples we like to give often at UFCW is when we look at a lot of the immigration schemes, especially as they relate to temporary foreign workers, there are legislative differences with the treatment of temporary foreign workers versus anybody else. So what we say is, what we'd say is that they're racist practices, right? When you say you're a temporary foreign worker and you have to contribute to the employment insurance scheme, but you are legislated out of ever receiving unemployment, right? What you're saying is you have to pay into the system that all other Canadians may depend on, but you will never be allowed to access that benefit that is provided primarily through that system. That is to say that we will extract further from you, but not allow you to participate as if you were a person working in this country. That's highly problematic, and it's not the only place we do it, right? If you look at Ontario, you look at Alberta, you look at different provinces that have actually legislated temporary foreign workers in the agricultural sector from accessing health and safety legislation. So what we're saying is a basic protection which just says that you're able to know that there are issues that might put you at vulnerability at your work, or the ability to participate or the ability to refuse unsafe work has been taken away from migrant workers that are often doing some of the most deadly and dangerous work. How I would tie that to the issue is that, like, we have a legacy of actually creating systems that don't allow folks to access or participate in them, and then we're blaming them that have no access to these systems as the issue as to why other people are having problems either accessing or experiencing what they're experiencing within these systems. And so when we talk about the solution, yeah, absolutely, the solution is granting folks access to status or pathways to citizenship. It's about ensuring that people that come in that have access to work are actually given access to stay so that they can contribute and continue working in the places that we do need workers, right? I think one of the interesting statistics that we have or models that we've been able to show is that in some of our meatpacking plants where we've been able to get people access to status, those folks, contrary to what industry would tell you, when people stay, they'll leave, and that's why we don't want to give them permanent residency status. It's actually been the opposite experience. In our meatpacking plants where people access status because they're union or their employer, they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to want to bring other people to work in these places. And so we know that we have certain gaps where labor shortages do exist. We know that there are workers willing to do that work, but as long as we treat those workers as vulnerable, precarious, and unable to access full status, we're the ones doing this disservice to ourselves. And so not only are folks that are under status and undocumented or underdocumented not contributing to the issue, they are and possibly do possess the ability to fix some of these issues. But I would say that industry, government has no interest in actually fixing the root causes. In fact, industry who benefits the most from these type of programs or these type of immigration schemes are driving governments to actually displace workers, to keep people vulnerable. And I don't think we have to point any further than the abandoning of this conversation around regularization, which really illustrates that at one point it was politically convenient for the Liberals to talk about regularizing folks that were underdocumented or undocumented. And then because it's convenient, or because the political moment was such that we had to alienate ourselves from that discourse, the Liberals abandoned that conversation completely, right? And that is to say that rather than being true to what Canada would like to present itself as this inclusive society, we're quite the opposite, right? And the people that are actually, at the end of the day, suffer the most are migrants, are people that are underdocumented, undocumented. And then the scapegoating of those folks is not to be so repetitive, but goes back to like our history and our legacy of being, this colonial country that has ripped land away from Indigenous folks to this land, who claim that this country is theirs, then displace Indigenous and racialize people from other bodies, bring them here, further exploit them, negate their ability to actually participate fully in our society, and then use them as a reason that our social services are eroding, when the reality is industry has been granted way too much power. The Conservatives have been happy to comply, and more recently, Liberals at a federal level have done the same.
We have 10 minutes left. We could talk about this probably for all day, forever. But for Matthias first, you just came off of 2 elections: your own election in the European elections last year, and this federal one in February. Immigration was a hot topic, and there was this rise of the far right. Could you tell us, if we're going through a federal election here in Canada as we speak, are there any lessons you'd like to share with Canadians on how to deal or talk about immigration policy?
Well, if you if you consider immigration in a nexus with security and with crime, this is what we've been talking about in Germany constantly, it will always favor the far right. It will always favor the far right because they kind of do own the issue, yeah? I always constantly see, not only in my country, but also in other European countries, center-right parties and actors to kind of take over this discourse and debate because they think when we are the actors of this debate, then we will get the votes and the far right will shrink in their support. It never happens. It never happens. If you have this kind of toxic debate about migration and crime, then you always favor the far right. So never do it. I think that you're not likely to do it, but it will. Sometimes you can't escape a national debate on it. So I mean, it's maybe known that we had several very cruel and also terrorist attacks in the run-up to the elections that were committed by people that some way or the other came through a refugee status to Germany. So it was a very, very unfortunate debate we had because it was not possible to talk soberly on the issue anymore. So you should never enter into this. I mean, that's obvious. It's obvious. I mean, problems exist, but problems can be solved. And you always need to talk about these issues in a general way about what kind of society we want to be, what kind of services our society wants to deliver to its citizens, how can our citizens, how can everyone who lives in the country contribute to this society. This is the way it's supposed to be put forward. So never touch on these issues in the way that we did. This is the most simple idea that I could give. And just once you start to scapegoat, once you start to make people responsible for problems that they cannot solve, then it's very difficult to find a way out of it, because the far right will always fuel these sentiments. They will always find something else that migrants are allegedly responsible for, and so you can really not escape this discourse. It's very important to discuss policies on migration as part of a wider idea of how a good society should look like, and then also put resources into it and put political commitment into it. This is the best way you go forward.
And to the Canadians on the panel, we are in the midst of a federal election. I'll go with Pablo first. How should we be speaking about immigration if we take Matthias's advice, maybe at all? What's your take on immigration in the election today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that immigration shouldn't be seen as this political hot potato, right? I think we either have a mandate, a vision of what we want to build as a reality for how we treat migrants or immigrants in Canada, or we don't, right? Like it's just this need or ability to change winds or conversation or discourse depending on the political moment that we're seeing or living is the problem, right? We either have an approach that is holistic, that treats people with respect and dignity, that invites people in, or we don't. There is no middle ground. And I think that the conversation has to be around either holding the people that speak to this issue to some level of account on their actions. We need to focus and center the lived experiences, the displacement of people. When the new legislations or the new changes to migration happened, we literally affected 775,000 people that were impacted by this legislation. It was almost as if it didn't impact anybody, right? This discourse as if they're words on a piece of paper, but they don't have human impact. And so what I'd say is we need to either hold our politicians to account, or, I mean, we've always said it, and I think this space is always conducive to it, is that we have to find a way that we seek that power, how we're able to implement or create pathways to citizenship, how we're able to do something, the work that we do to ensure that services are available, that they're accessible, that they're real and tangible for the folks that need it. Because otherwise, we have manufactured ways of keeping people precarious, vulnerable, and at the outskirts of our society, and it's highly problematic. I guess I should have started today's conversation by saying I actually came to Canada as a refugee in the late 80s, and the experience of so many of us are that we end up being marginalized, that our families end up being precarious, end up having to labor in spaces and places that are dangerous, that don't allow us to access real, meaningful participation in society. And so we either have an approach as a country or we don't. And so this middling ground, or this ability to kind of seesaw depending on the political winds, is problematic. And so I think we actually have to hold politicians to an account in terms of like, what is the approach? What is our real identity as an immigration system in Canada, right? And if it's not that we're multicultural and it's not that we're inviting, then what is it, right? And let's call it what it is. And so I think we need to define who it is that we are as Canada when it comes to immigration, and actually keep anybody and everybody to that standard.
Gary, last words to you.
We do have to define it, and your experience is, yeah, very real, and it's something we have to recognize. I think we do have to define what we want it to be, because the politicians are always bad at it, and they vacillate with, oh, what's winnable tomorrow, what's winnable right now. In the election we're in right now, somewhat gratefully, the potential for immigration to be a very frontline issue did go down, because it has become about Trump and the tariffs. And in that context, there is actually some opening as we see people across Canada, including refugees and migrant communities that we work with, rallying to define who actually are we and who aren't we. There is an important promise there about testing this question: do we want to be a nation that actually upholds human rights and dignities? Do we want to be a nation that brings indentured labor to work in essentially modern-day slave-like conditions in absolutely unacceptable housing? Or do we want to be a society that welcomes people to live in dignity and contribute in all of the ways? Underneath the study that you had is a strong sense that there are really important contributions that immigration makes, but there is nothing linear or naturally progressive about the way Canada will evolve. And so, as much as I'm embittered by the experience, I feel like it's incumbent upon us. Internally, we need to talk a lot about how shitty it is, but we actually have to project a hopeful message about the communities and the country we could be. And it's not a long list of policy recommendations. So our experience has been, and I have to say that all these policy kind of wonks on the panel. Anant Shekhar is talking to us a lot of times about selling the brownie, the back of the box, and in your conversations with your policy platform people and your leaders, you have to explain, you have to add an egg, turn it to 350, 1 cup of flour. That's not what's interesting, how you get to the brownie. You've got to sell the brownie on the box. So we have to think about what's the vision, the compassionate vision, things like, if we're good enough to work here, we are good enough to live here. People can rally behind messages like that. Do we want to be a country that welcomes people, that offers safety? If your family was fleeing safety, how do we want to be treated by our neighbors? These are the kind of hope-based, values-based messages that if we can mobilize our base to connect with that mushy middle that vacillates all the time, that is how I think we will create space. It will not be easy. That is the work of activism, and that is what we look forward to finding ways to work on with all of you. Thank you.
Gary, Pablo, Matthias, thank you, vielen Dank, for this amazing panel. Give it up for the panelists. Yes. So we now have a 15-minute coffee break. You'll find coffee in the lobby. And then up next on this stage, we'll have Leader of Canada's NDP, Jagmeet Singh.
Good afternoon, everybody. One more time. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, that's better. Thank you so much. So we're just going to get it moving. I want to bring out our next speaker to introduce the leader of Canada's NDP. So without further ado, I want to bring out Francis Abel, our Broadbent Institute Research Fellow and a beloved member of our community, to introduce Jagmeet. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. Well, considering his other business this month, we are fortunate indeed that Jagmeet Singh has made the time to join us for a fireside chat this morning. Obviously, all elections are important, but this is an unusually important one, nothing less than the future shape of the Canadian economy, its reorientation in the world, and its internal redesign is before us. A strong NDP presence in the House of Commons is essential if we are to protect the gains that Jagmeet and the other New Democrat members made during the last Liberal government. These are monumental achievements, the first advances to the welfare state in decades. We can all be proud of this and of our leader, and ambitious for more. We can gain more. We're coming into a very fluid time, and I hope it will be a time when the support of the New Democratic Party is essential to whoever forms the government. Like his friend and mentor, Ed Broadbent, Jagmeet is a tireless and a joyful campaigner. Ed called him a happy warrior, referring to his disposition, yes, but also to his courage. Jagmeet and Ed shared a deep confidence in the future of social democracy and a deep understanding of what it would mean for Canada to have a true social democratic government. I know that they drew strength from each other's commitment. It's my honor to welcome our leader, Jagmeet Singh.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wow, thank you very much. Thank you, Francis, for the beautiful words and for reminding us all of Ed's legacy, of his commitment to our movement, to our party, and to building a better Canada. Thank you so much. Give it up for Francis. A huge thank you to the Broadbent Institute. As an institute, this is the preeminent institute to provide a vision for a better future, a more progressive future, a more inclusive future. And for everyone that's attending, all of you here today at the Progress Summit, you are the leaders in communities. You are the folks that are fighting for a better community, a better country. And I want to thank each and every one of you for the work that you do. Each and every one of you contributes massively to this project of building this better world. We know we can do. So thank you. Je veux d'abord remercier l'Institut Broadbent pour son travail acharné, incroyable, et aussi à vous tous, parce que vous êtes ici dans ce sommet. Ce sommet représente vraiment le mouvement progressiste du Canada, donc votre présence, votre implication, le travail que vous faites, c'est incroyable. Merci pour tout ce que vous faites. Merci. Friends, in March alone, Canada lost over 32,000 jobs, mostly full-time and not by accident. It's the result of US-imposed tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and auto, and corporate executives holding back investments to protect their bottom line. We know that what happens next when things get hard, It's never the CEOs or executives that take the hit. It's working people. It's the middle class. It's families who get the pink slips, who have to cut back on groceries, delay the dentist, and go without the medication they need, while the rich and powerful never feel the pinch. Rien qu'en mars, le Canada a perdu plus de 32 000 emplois. Et ce n'est pas un hasard. En temps de crise, c'est toujours les mêmes qui paient. Les travailleurs et travailleuses, monsieur, madame, tout le monde, pendant que les riches PDG s'enrichissent. C'est normal parce que les libéraux et les conservateurs se concentrent à protéger les ultra-riches pendant qu'ils laissent les travailleurs avec un système d'assurance-emploi pourri. C'est pourquoi on a besoin du NPD à Ottawa, pour s'assurer que les travailleurs et travailleuses ont une voix. Pour quelqu'un qui s'y batte pour protéger les travailleurs et travailleuses. That's why we're here. Because in a moment when everyday people are being asked to carry the weight, we need a movement that refuses to let them carry it alone. This isn't theoretical. This isn't abstract. Real people are feeling the impact every day. Let me tell you a story. I met this young boy with his dad when I first became leader in Ottawa. And he had type 1 diabetes. And he told me about all the medications he's got to take, the injections, the fact that he's got this incurable disease. And I said, well, that's pretty heavy. This 10-year-old kid telling him about the fact that he knows he could die if he doesn't monitor his blood sugar. And I asked him, what's that like for you? He said, I'm not worried. I got this. I can take care of myself. I know I can take the right medication and to get my injections. I'm okay. The one thing I'm worried about, 10-year-old kid, the one thing I'm worried about is being a burden on my parents. Little kid. And he's like, I don't want to be a burden on them. And I looked him in his eyes and I said, I promise you, I'm going to fight to change that. And we kept that promise. 25 New Democrats. Our caucus of 25 New Democrat MPs, and most importantly, every Canadian who voted for us in 2021, forced the Liberal government to make diabetes medication free for all. We did that together, all of us. Je veux partager une autre histoire. C'est concernant Suzanne, mais elle a insisté que je l'appelle Sue, donc je vais utiliser le nom Sue. Sue est une personne âgée. Elle a pris sa retraite, donc elle a un salaire fixe. Et elle est une survivante de cancer. Donc ça veut dire qu'elle a pris tous les médicaments pour faire face à cancer et elle est une survivante. Mais à cause de cette maladie, elle a perdu ses dents. Donc, j'étais avec elle. Elle m'a invité d'être là quand elle a visité le dentiste pour la première fois. Elle était dans la chaise, dans le bureau du dentiste, et elle a demandé au dentiste si elle peut avoir encore sa souris. Et elle a une ancienne photo de sa souris. Et elle a dit est-ce que vous pouvez m'aider? Et j'étais là quand le dentiste a dit oui. Je vais vous aider et je vais vous aider avec vos sourires encore. Et c'est grâce à ce programme de soins dentaires. Et je me rappelle ces larmes de joie quand elle a dit que je vais avoir ma dignité encore. C'était nous qui avons fait ça. All of this is a reminder that power is only meaningful when you use it to make life better for others. We gather today in the shadow of Ed Broadbent's legacy. But more importantly, we are here to move his fight forward. His politics were rooted in justice, compassion, and courage. Ed reminded us it's not just about seeking power. It's about how we use that power. And when New Democrats have had power, we've used it to make life better for working people. And yes, that even meant making a deal with the Liberals. Now, Ed never had any illusions about the Liberals. He knew, like too many forget, that the Liberals only do the right thing when they're forced to. They do it when they're pushed, when they're pressured, when they know someone's holding them to account. Now, some of you may remember an interview he did, and there were headlines. People said he was calling us out for not ending our deal with the Liberals sooner. And after the news broke, Ed called me immediately to say, no, that's not what he meant. He was incredibly proud of what we had accomplished. But what he said to me afterwards was very simple. He said, you can't trust the Liberals. You have to force them to do the right thing every time. Now, some of you might not like hearing this, but what Ed said was true. Ed understood something essential about how progress actually happens in this country. It's not that the Liberals don't talk a good game. They do. I admit it. They talk a great game. And some may genuinely believe in the things we fight for. But they only deliver when New Democrats have had the power to make them deliver. That's the difference. When we stand our ground, when we stay clear in our purpose and relentless in our fight, we hold them accountable. That's how we got universal health care. That's how we won pensions, bargaining rights, dental care, and that's how we took the first steps towards national pharmacare. And it's how I kept my promise to that young boy about the worry about his cost of medication. The things Canadians are most proud of, the things that make us believe in this country, only happened because New Democrats fought for them. And we could only fight for them because people have used their power, their vote, to send us to Ottawa. That's our legacy. That's our responsibility. That's why we're here. We fight for public health care because it's the foundation of who we are. We fight for strong unions and good jobs because working people deserve more than just to get by. They deserve the power to stand up to the boss, for fairness, for better pay, and a decent life. Because strong unions make a strong, resilient Canadian economy. And we won't let Donald Trump or anyone else tear that down or trade it away. We fight for housing as a human right, for clean air and safe water, for Indigenous justice, for a Canada where every person can live with security and purpose. La majorité des programmes dont nous sommes fiers sont le résultat du travail du NPD, que ce soit notre système de santé, l'assurance-emploi ou le régime de pension du Canada. À chaque fois qu'on a eu la balance du pouvoir, on l'a utilisé pour aider les gens, pas les riches PDG. On l'a prouvé encore dans le dernier mandat. Avec seulement 25 députés, nous avons mis en place des soins dentaires pour plus de millions de Québécois. On a mis la base pour une assurance médicaments universelle et entièrement publique. Et on a banni les briseurs de grève. Imaginez ce qu'on pourra faire avec plus de néo-démocrates. In this last parliament, with just 25 New Democrat MPs, we fought to deliver dental care for kids and seniors. We introduced national pharmacare after 30 years of broken Liberal promises. We secured anti-scab legislation after decades of liberals and conservatives voting it down. We won 10 paid sick days. That's what happens. That's what happens when you elect New Democrats. We don't waste the power you give us, we wield it for people. Now imagine what more we could do with even more New Democrats in Ottawa, because the stakes couldn't be higher. Pierre Poilievre wants to bring Trump-style politics to Canada. He wants to divide us when we need unity. He would hand our housing crisis to the very predatory corporations who caused it. And we know the cuts he has planned would be devastating. He attacks trans kids, he stokes the flames of fear. He threatens the very principles that define who we are. That's not a vision, it's a warning sign. And if he wins, Canadians lose. But here's the hard truth. If the Liberals win, just because they're less bad than the alternative, nothing ever changes for the better. That's how we got here. 10 years of Liberals. And what do we have to show for it? Rising rents, exploding grocery prices, emergency rooms stretched to the breaking point, family doctors impossible to find, all the while the rich keep getting richer. Everyday people have been told to wait, to sacrifice, while they fall further and further behind. Every day in this campaign, I hear the stories of people who aren't just struggling, they're scared. And it doesn't have to be this way. Very shortly after the election, there will be a federal budget. And you need New Democrats to be there, fighting to make sure it delivers for working and middle-class people. And what that means concretely is saying no to Carney's $43 billion in cuts to healthcare, old age security, and pensions. It means pushing for national rent control, a family doctor for every Canadian, and more nurses and healthcare workers, universal pharmacare, starting with essential medicines, grocery price caps, better EI, tax relief for working people, making sure we make the rich pay for it, making CEOs and big corporations and the ultra-wealthy finally pay their fair share. NDP, NDP, NDP. Because, my friends, every budget is a choice. And too often those choices protect profits while working families have to fend for themselves. The 32,000 jobs lost last month are just the beginning. It's a warning sign of what's coming. The next government will face real pressure, and working people will need someone in their corner, fighting to make sure they don't pay the price again, and holding those in power accountable for the choices they make. Alors, quand quelqu'un demande pourquoi voter pour l'NPD, répondez-lui ceci: parce que lorsque nous avons du pouvoir, nous l'utilisons pour faire avancer les choses, pour améliorer la vie des gens. Pour garder les libéraux honnêtes. Le Canada fonctionne mieux lorsque les néo-démocrates sont forts. Et Ottawa fonctionne mieux lorsque un parti n'a pas tout le pouvoir. Cette élection, vous pouvez voter pour avoir plus de néo-démocrates qui vont se battre pour un contrôle national des loyers, pas enrichir les géants immobiliers. Investir en santé au lieu de couper ou privatiser. Une assurance médicaments universelle, en commençant par les médicaments essentiels au lieu de protéger les grandes compagnies pharmaceutiques. Un plafonnement des prix à l'épicerie plutôt que d'enrichir Galen Weston. Donner un coup de pouce aux travailleurs et travailleuses avec l'assurance emploi et une coupure d'impôts au lieu d'aider les millionnaires. Et le NPD va être là pour protéger la langue française, la culture et nos agriculteurs contre Donald Trump. Quand vous votez... Merci. Merci. Quand vous votez NPD, vous votez pour aider les gens, pas les riches PDG. So when someone asks you, why vote NDP? Tell them this. Because when we have power, we use it to get things done, to make life better for people. Because Canada works best when New Democrats are strong. And Ottawa works best when there's someone there to hold the powerful to account. And in a moment when Trump threatens our country, we need leaders who will do more than just stand up for Canada. We must protect what makes us proud to be Canadian. That's the kind of politics Ed Broadbent believed in. That's what New Democrats deliver. And we'll keep fighting for it with you, because your vote isn't just a choice. Your vote isn't just a choice, it's a statement of values and a commitment to a better Canada. You're not just part of the movement, you are the reason it moves. Merci. Thank you so much. Let's go build it together. Let's get out there and fight together, my friends. Let's go make it happen. We can do this. Let's go. Merci. Thank you so much.
They told me to keep this short, but they just gave a microphone to a teacher, so we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for having me, sir.
You're amazing. This is, folks, this is like not just a teacher and an education worker extraordinaire. This is Joanna, TikTok star extraordinaire as well. Round of applause for Joanna.
I should have my phone filming it right now. So I have a list of questions. What I'm hoping for is to just start a conversation. I'm much better at that than I am the list of questions. But I wanted to have a premise. I wanted to have a base to start one of the most important conversations leading into this election. First and foremost, dental and pharmacare. Such incredible accomplishments, such powerful changes to the way Canada takes care of its people. If I were to ask you, and I know this is asking a lot, hun. That was an accident. That was a nice hun, not a mean hun. What's next?
What's next?
One thing, give me one thing, one powerful movement.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot. I really feel like the context of what's next has to be the context of what we're up against. So we got all sorts of chaos coming from Donald Trump. Folks are really worried. There's a lot of unpredictability about what's going to happen next. And I feel like what comes next has to respond to that. The fact that Canadians are wondering, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? And I really think that the next budget is going to be a really important time for us to say, well, what are we going to do for everyday folks who are feeling this worry and are feeling uncertain and maybe scared of the future? How do we give people some hope, some real concrete hope? And so what's next for me, I think the things I laid out, we got to make sure people can afford their groceries, they can afford a home, they got to be able to live a good life, we got to give people relief. We have to have employment insurance that's high enough to cover people's bills, because right now, the amount that you get barely is half your salary. People can't survive off of that. So we've got to really, I would say it would be putting working people, everyday people first, and making sure we've got a budget that protects them.
I think handling individual like Donald Trump is a special kind of skill set I'm not sure anybody really anticipated. But what he's done in a very accidental way is he's highlighted the importance of the NDP, the importance of protecting the Canadian worker unions, the establishment of all the gains we make. He's the antithesis, I was going to use a different word there, antithesis to that. Right. He has done a very odd service to say, this is why the NDP is incredibly needed. So how would you handle him?
Yeah, I think, on fighting back against Donald Trump, I think we all need to be united. We're one country fighting back against an attack directly to our workers, so let's stay united. But then, what you mentioned is a really important thing. There's this sense that he's attacking who we are. Absolutely. And so Canadians are starting to say, well, I don't want to be the 51st state. I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud to be Canadian. And then people are starting to examine, well, what does that mean to be proud to be Canadian? And like you said, it makes people think about the values that we're fighting for. And that's where people start to say, well, I'm proud of our universal health care. I'm proud that we take care of each other. We don't let people just fend for themselves. And then people start to wonder, well, who's going to actually protect the things that I value, the things that matter to me? And I can tell you that when it comes down to it, we've seen in the past that sadly, Liberals have made massive cuts to our public health care, and it's starved it of funding. Folks will remember that. When they talked about balancing budgets and they talked about cuts, they just slashed healthcare is what they did. And we know that Pierre Poilievre is proposing openly deep cuts. That's very scary. And so it's really important now to say, well, who's going to actually defend the things that we care about, that make us Canadian, those values that we hold dear? I would say to you, New Democrats are the only ones that are committed to keeping our public healthcare public, universal. You never have to pay. It's not about privatization and enriching the pockets of those at the top, but about making sure people get the best quality care. And we're the only ones going to defend that value.
I'm not used to being outspoken. On the healthcare aspect, how do we stop that privatization train that it seems as though a lot of provincial premiers maybe are driving that train a little too hard and understanding the division of power there? How does our federal government stop that progression?
We enforce the Canada Health Act. We've got laws in place that say that we can defend it. Let's enforce it. The other big thing that we have, the other tool is we negotiate healthcare transfers. And we can require a condition that if we're giving public money, hard-earned Canadians public money to our healthcare system, we could require a condition that not a single cent of that money should go to a for-profit private clinic. It should go only to public healthcare.
So when I talk about these issues and people really do try to articulate what it is to be Canadian, they list exactly what you're talking about, yet still feel or still have the conversations that say, well, I'm stuck between Carney and Poilievre. I don't want to split the vote. How do you address those kind of fundamental fears for Canadians who are just trying to figure out sometimes, rather than putting the best person in the job, how do I avoid the worst?
Well, I would say, think about when Ottawa works best, or when Canada has been at its best. And the things that have made us most proud as Canadians has happened when one party didn't hold all the power. That's when the best things have happened in Canada. When New Democrats have had strength, some of the best things have happened. Like our advances haven't happened by chance. We fought for them. And New Democrats don't just exist in a vacuum. When we fought for universal health care with Tommy Douglas gets a credit, but it's because Canadians voted for him. Right. Canadians voted for Tommy Douglas and his New Democrat team, and he was able to then do it. And while my team and I are proud that we were able to use our power to bring in dental care and pharmacare, we couldn't have done that but for Canadians who said, you know what, we're going to vote for New Democrats and send them to Ottawa. And I said this in my speech in French, but I mean it. A lot of times, folks have always said to me when I was kind of walking around in the community between elections, keep them honest. Get out there and keep them honest. Because Canadians know on their own, the Liberals aren't going to do what people need. So you need New Democrats there fighting for you. And so I would say, like, remember our history, remember what we've done recently. Anytime things have worked out for people is when there's been strong New Democrats and when one party doesn't hold all the power.
Absolutely. And I think forcing power to come to heel has always been an incredibly powerful role for the NDP, and it's worked out incredibly well for Canadians. When you talk about affordability, people throw around the word affordability all the time. They don't worry, I'm going to make everything more affordable. And I don't feel as though they give concrete examples of how they're going to bring that to fruition. And I don't think they bring concrete examples because they don't have any. What would you say, and how quickly could you bring affordability to Canadians, whether they be grocery prices or rent or mortgage rates? What would you say that you would be your first step, and how quickly could you make that transition?
I think this is really important. I think it also gets at cynicism, because people say, oh, you made this promise. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's achievable. And then people don't feel like it even matters if they vote or not. I think when you don't give people a real clear vision of how you can achieve these things, it feeds into people being apathetic about voting. And so one concrete example that we have said before, we put forward a motion on this before, we put forward bills on this before, something that we want to see happen is a price cap on food essentials. This is a concrete way to bring down food prices. And so, yeah. So what that means is on a basket of essential food items, so think about like bread or baby formula, the essentials that people need, we would impose a price cap. You can't charge more than a fair amount, a reasonable amount for these items. And for a proof point, France has done it and brought down food inflation by over 15% by doing this. Greece has done it and brought down food prices by 15%. So it can be done. Other countries have done it. And more economists are saying, when we're seeing prices go up and they're driven by the people that sell those items, they're the ones that are driving up the prices. The only way to bring them back down or to stop this gouging is to put in laws that stop price gouging. And a price cap, a cap on food essentials is a way to do that.
We hear a lot about how rich people hide their money. Number one, how do I get the money and how do I hide it? No, that's not the question. It's not the question. It's not on this sheet. We hear about the Cayman Islands. We hear about numbered bank accounts. We hear of tax avoidance, and if the 0.1% paid their fair share, what kind of position we would be in. How do we combat that?
First, let's just talk about what's at stake, because it's not just happening in a vacuum. Like when a company doesn't pay its taxes, and we're not talking about increased taxes, just as paying what you owe. And then there's purposeful tax avoidance. There's both those things that go on in Canada. When a company doesn't pay what it owes or purposely avoids paying taxes, that's less investment in healthcare. So what does that mean? Less nurses, less doctors, less frontline healthcare workers. It means less care for people. It literally is starving our system. It means less investments in building the things that we need, public infrastructure, public transit. And so these companies, while it may be legal in some cases, are stealing, are cheating from people. And some of the examples that we're hearing about, there's offshore tax accounts, where offshore tax havens, where people or companies are registering in another country, and they're doing that because we have an agreement with that country. So Bermuda is an example. We have an agreement with Bermuda, and you can set up a company there. But it's not like everyday people can like say, all right, I'm gonna change my address to Bermuda and then not pay my taxes. Why do we let companies do that? Particularly if a company makes its profits entirely in Canada and then just registers in another country to avoid paying taxes, that's wrong. And people might say, well, you know, they might leave. No, they're making their profits here, pay your taxes here. So concretely, what we could do, we could end those agreements, and we've laid that out. We would end those agreements. The second thing is we could put in an accounting rule. If you are setting up your company that makes its profits in Canada, in another country, prove to us the economic benefit of where you're setting up your office. Prove to us there's an economic reason for it. And if you can't prove it, then you got to pay your taxes in Canada. And the example I would give you the example I had to give you is Brookfield Investments set up billions of dollars of investments in an office in Hamilton, but not Hamilton, Ontario, Hamilton, Bermuda. And the office is above a bike shop. And it's like a little teeny office. There's no economic purpose for setting it up there. It's clearly to avoid paying taxes. And I'm worried that if, the chair of that, you might know the chair of that company, who just like a couple months ago was the chair, if they're willing to make a decision, that was his personal fund, like the fund that he was managing, if he's gonna do that with his own fund that he had control over, how can we trust him to close these tax loopholes? And we're talking about billions and billions of dollars of revenue we're losing. Tens of billions of dollars.
I'd like more information on that. I've never heard of it before. It's a coincidence. I have one more question. It's a hard one.
Sure.
So Canada works best when we take care of each other. Canada works best when we understand our fundamental values. We're sitting in an unprecedented time, I think, of fear. I think people are driven by fear, and when we're driven as such, we tend to do less intelligent things. We tend to act and react, and anger gets the best of us, or emotion gets the best of us. If you could wipe that away and replace it with a level of empowerment and a level of hope, how would you do that?
I think a lot of folks kind of prey on fear. When there's a fear, you can start pitting people against each other. And I think a lot of what the Conservatives were trying to do is to use fear as a way to divide us, to say, oh, it's that person's fault, or blame this community, and pit us against each other. And I think one of the things that we have to do is acknowledge that fear is coming from a real place, acknowledge the worry that Canadians have, the uncertainty in their lives, and then we have an obligation and a responsibility to give people some hope. And the hope is that there are things that we can do to make people's lives better, that we have choices that we can make that put people first, and that choices have brought us to this position where the country has decided to let big corporations buy up affordable homes, and we don't have affordable homes for everyday people. That corporate grocery store greed and jacking up prices has been let to happen unfettered, and that's meant that people can't afford their groceries. And we have a responsibility to say, well, those choices resulted in your hardship. We can make better choices to get better outcomes. And I want folks to know that I truly believe we can tackle these challenges. They're not easy, but there are better choices we can make. And so for folks out there who are worried, I want you to believe better is possible. We can bring down the price of groceries. We can build homes that people can truly afford. We can invest in our healthcare system and save it and strengthen it and make it there for people when they need it. This is all possible, but we have to give people that hope that better is possible. And I hope people can look to me and the New Democrats and see we're in it for you. We're not going to try to help out the billionaires or Brookfield Investments or Galen Weston. We're fighting for you and your family. And trust me when I say we deliver dental care and pharmacare, we can make life more affordable. We can build a brighter future for Canadians. Trust me when I say that.
And although I would like to stay here for the 45 minutes I thought I had, I'm going to have to roll it in. But thank you so much for putting who you are, putting everything on the line for Canada, for what you believe in, for what you think is fair, what you think is just, because it's that kind of bravery, I think, that are going to empower millions of Canadians to do the same thing in their own lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Joe. Thank you to Broadbent Institute. Thank you so much.
Oop. Check, check. Right on. Hi, folks. Thank you so much for Jagmeet for taking the time to join us straight from the campaign trail to remind us all what's at stake in this election. And now I'm really excited to get to introduce our next speaker, or introduce the person who will be introducing our next. Check, check. Thank you. Somebody who really embodies the spirit of this summit. Somebody who really, in her life, in her work, dares to take on today's crises with boldness and clarity and unstoppable organizing power. And to help all of us welcome her this afternoon, I'm going to turn things over to a longtime friend and ally to the labor movement. Please join me in welcoming Nat Wilson, CEO of Point Blank Creative.
Hello, everyone. Okay, that was great. And you know you are in for something even more exciting. We are still in this room on Friday afternoon, last day of the conference, after the super fun evening we have had, and it is to hear from one of the most remarkable organizers and speakers who I just had the chance to spend 30 minutes with. I feel like I could rewrite my entire introduction now. So I woke up early this morning thinking about what it means to be here, not just to learn from each other, but to fill our buckets too, to feel hope, to feel inspired, to gain that inspiration from each other, and to talk about people who are actually doing the work and winning their fights. Because there are fights being won, and we need that to push us forward. So we are so lucky to be hearing from our next speaker, someone who truly shows us what's possible when we put activism and organizing at the core of our work, so it becomes not just what we do, but who we are. While we are listening, I would like us to hold on to that possibility. Here in Ontario, we have spent the last 7 years fighting back against Doug Ford while he intentionally undermines, dismantles, defunds the things we value, like public education. It's unfortunately not an uncommon story in many of the provinces and cities and places where we live and work. It is getting harder and harder for everyone. Teachers, education workers, students, families, anyone fighting for the supports to just be and to be okay. And we feel the weight of leaders like Ford and others being reelected into a majority government in these times. That feeling of like we're doing this again. We are doing this again, and the piece of it that we are doing again is deep organizing, talking to people, having hard conversations, and mobilizing them, the kind of work that lasts beyond any election cycle. So there's no better time for us to be hearing from Stacey Davis Gates, and I am so honored to welcome her today. She is so cool. Wait till you see her suit. Stacey is not just the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, she is leading the charge in a very deep and serious fight for justice, beyond educational justice. Stacey is a former high school teacher. She fully stepped into her political voice when her own school was closed down. And now, under her leadership, the Chicago Teachers Union has transformed into one of the most influential progressive unions in North America. They are fighting on fair wages and better classrooms, but they're also fighting for affordable housing. They're fighting for racial justice and holding the core belief that everyone should be able to live here and have their needs met. Stacey reminds us that organizing isn't just about resistance, it is about vision. A vision of inclusive, thriving cities, of schools that nurture, not just neglect, where equity is our lived reality, not just a checkbox. Stacey doesn't just talk about solidarity, she builds it. She told me to ditch this whole thing. We are not just our work. But from walking picket lines in Chicago to standing shoulder to shoulder with community coalitions across the country and now here in Canada, she is showing what's possible, especially when working people come together, understanding that we all deserve better and you can demand more. You can demand more justice, more dignity, and more democracy. So please join me in giving the warmest welcome to an amazing educator, parent, advocate, real movement builder that we can all learn so much from, Stacey Davis Gates.
Well, good afternoon. Yeah, that was a nice welcome, a great introduction. I hear some Americans are still welcome in Canada, so I appreciate that. Thank you. So let me get right to it, because this is a room full of people who have to check their phones and hop on a Zoom for a moment and, just figure out what's going on without them. So I'll get to it. My name is Stacey Davis Gates. People ask me to come do things like this because they want to engage with the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. But if I bring my authentic self, I bring Hazel and Laura's granddaughter, two women who left the southern region of America, cotton fields, to migrate north to manifest me. And when I bring that person, I bring to you the story of hope and resilience. So the work that we do, the justice work, the human work that we all get to do, I bring that authenticity because this is difficult work. It is almost impossible work. And so when you engage in this work, you have to be very intentional about what the objective is and that it is long-term. It kinda, emphasis on kinda, it kinda helps you deal with it, the work, when it gets bad. Because it's bad right now. We have, every morning on IG, I'm looking at this picture of men in an El Salvadorian prison. Their heads are shaved. They are stripped of their clothing. And there are women in photo ops with them, a woman. It is a shame. And I'm thinking to myself, because I am a high school history teacher, how many more steps do we have? And will some of those steps be expedited? And who's the resistance? And how do we practice resilience in this moment? Who summons the courage? And who leads the charge? And so I want to submit to you that this is the room that has to take accountability for that, because we have to build a lot of rooms to take accountability for that. Whatever you're feeling about electoral work, get over it. And I'm going to talk to you about why you do have to get over it, because right now, real people depend on us to have answers, to have courage, to have coalition. And right now, you're in a room that is already coalition. Labor is in the room. Why are y'all so quiet? Labor's in the room. I hear community organizations are in the room. I hear elected officials are here. Yeah. Not sure if it's safe, right? I hear NGOs are in the room. I hear academics are in the room. I hear policymakers are in the room. And you're all in the crosshairs of those who seek to dehumanize us. Because this coalition is what's going to save us. So I'm going to tell you a story. You know, I wrote this whole speech. I'm kidding. My communications guy did. And it's really good. It is. He takes a couple shots at Elon. You know, he mentions the occupant of, you know, the White House built by Black people on Pennsylvania Avenue. But I'll be doing none of that, apparently. Because when I was backstage, I was told that people needed to hear hope and possibility. So, Chicago, Illinois, it is really the ground zero for this confluence of neoliberal and right-wing policy. It is an unholy alliance that in Chicago was directed expressly for public education. So I'm going to talk to you about a system that closed schools on Black children on purpose in neighborhoods that have never had enough. It was inhumane. And it doubled down because in those schools, Black women like me made a choice to work, right? And we were then fired and pushed out of those places. So not only did you come from the most marginalized human beings, our young children, you also came for the worker class. So people like Paul Vallis and Rahm Emanuel and Arne Duncan closed like 200 schools, but they got permission to do it from a legislature that was Republican-led, right-wing. In fact, some of the testimony during the debate to give the mayor of Chicago unfettered control of the Chicago public schools was racist, like blatantly racist. And then a Republican governor signed the bill that became the law. And from 1995 to 2012, the behavior of this closing, of this consolidation, of this marginalization of that public good went unchecked, largely. It was the community groups that kept vigil, though. It was the community groups that understood the strategy and then the ensuing impacts. They continued to sound the alarm in ways in which once upon a time my union couldn't even hear. It couldn't. My school was closed in 2005. And Arne Duncan, you know him, he became the Secretary of Education under the first Black president, Barack Obama. He closed my school, don't clap, he closed my school. He said we were failing. But we were also in a neighborhood that Lorraine Hansberry, you know that woman, right? The playwright, literary genius, Southside Chicagoan, who grew up in the Inglewood neighborhood. A Raisin in the Sun is about that neighborhood that I got to teach in. Wow. So after families integrated the Inglewood neighborhood, Black families, the resources started to leave that neighborhood. And so you had this confluence of segregation, of poverty, of disinvestment, of racism, manifest in that school community because it was already planted in the neighborhood. And by 2005, Arne Duncan said he had enough, and he was closing us, and the kids would have to go elsewhere. Real interesting, right? To close a thing that is supposed to provide a public good in a place that had been robbed of those public goods. But remember the story of A Raisin in the Sun and the hope and the aspiration and the possibility that that gave that family. It's a theme here. They closed the school, and then they replaced it with other stuff. Some of it was privatized. Others were more marginal because they didn't want to educate all of the children in the neighborhood, just the ones that they thought they could educate without a lot of resources, right? Because if you have a complex life, it means you have complex needs. And it means if you have complex needs, that school community and those public institutions have to address those needs, and it costs money. And so if actual people who need those resources are getting those resources, it means that Elon Musk can't get them. See, I said it anyway. It means that Doge is a problem, right? It means that we already had Doge in Chicago. I'm coming back to this theme of hope and possibility. Doge closed 50 schools in 2013 at one time. One time, 50 schools. Some labor folks say 50 work sites. Community people say neighborhood centers, right? Researchers and academics say, oh my goodness, let's study this, right? And families said, what do I do next? And so this begins the hope and the possibility of the union that I belong to. In 2012, Karen Lewis, you all know something about that lady. She, Jesse Sharkey, Jackson Potter, Christine Maley, Michael Brunson, they take the city of Chicago on an awesome ride of strike. So before we can get to the actual injustice of the closing, we have to figure out how to find a voice to do it. Remember I told you, in 1995, the mayor of Chicago got control of the school system. By getting control of the school system, they began to make decisions. And these decisions don't come with any democracy, not a lot of accountability either, because like the mayor of Chicago. So it's just happening. Schools are closing, children are being displaced, children are getting lost in the system, children are being pointed towards the school to prison pipeline. In fact, during that time, the Chicago Public Schools had a very auspicious statistic. It was the one place in the country that suspended and expelled disproportionately more Black children than any other school district. So listen to what I'm saying, mayoral control, a marginalization of the opportunities through the actual school community, cutting of the workforce, which was also Black and middle class. These are the people who hold the anchors, because I told you Chicago is segregated. So everybody in my neighborhood look like me, whether they are middle class or not. So our neighborhoods are also being marginalized. Remember, schools stand empty. What does that do to property values? So you have this wholesale assault, and they're selling it to us in the language of the civil rights movement. It is an injustice for Black children to be regulated to dropout factories. They are foreclosing on their future, and then you get things like No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top policymakers. You get laws all across this country that marginalize the public good, that privatize that good, and then marginalize it some more until it's closed or so narrow that the vast majority of children don't even get an opportunity to participate. That's what's happening in Chicago with schools. Not with housing, not with health care, schools. You have to be some type of monster to zero in on children and create policies that you know will harm them. So I would like to get up here and tell you that our labor union made a choice to do this. But our labor union had no other choice but to do this. See what I'm saying? Hope and possibility. It isn't always that dream that civil rights leaders get caricatured for, but it is survival that most often triggers a behavior that is both courageous, bold, and unapologetic. That's how you get our union. We didn't have a choice. And because we didn't have a choice, and because if you don't have a choice, it also means you ain't got too much to lose either. So what are you holding on to? Well, you're holding on to hope and possibility. The hope that Black children, brown children, immigrant children, working class children, all children in the city of Chicago can get the schools that they deserve. That's the hope. And the possibility is only available to us when we clarify who we're doing it for. Intention. What is our intention? Well, ours was survival, but some of us, because we're like actual teachers and stuff, we care about like what happens to the young people, right? Because these are the people that we get to engage with every day. It's not a workplace only. It is really a place where you connect and you engage, you form, you storm, you create. It is like a living organism, these schools. And you see so many beautiful people like Louise Robinson, who lost her mother at an early age and whose dad wasn't present, but her grandmother was her anchor. But her grandmother, of course, couldn't keep up with everything, and so Louise fell behind. But it was the public school and the opportunity to attend the school and have a program that created a safe space for her and that was small enough to like support her. Louise is now a social worker, right? The possibility. And so your intention is to have more Louises. So our union forms this iteration of leadership from Karen Lewis to Jessie Sharkey to now Stacey Davis Gates. We form because we didn't have a choice to form. But we also understood that we couldn't do it together alone. We had to do it with, because it's Chicago. It is 2025, and I just told you I lived in a segregated neighborhood, and no one even flinched. Shame. I do. I am raising my children in one of the most segregated cities in this world. And that segregation allows the disparities to mushroom because it is hidden from those who would be compelled otherwise. So what the Chicago Teachers Union had to do was figure out how to connect with those who were already keeping vigil. Dyett High School is a Black high school in the Washington Park neighborhood, South Side. Washington Park is a beautiful park, right? If Chicago had won the Olympics, they would have destroyed its beauty, and you would have known more about it. But at any rate, Dyett High School, this is the story that I'm gonna tell you. Our union fought very hard in 2013 to stop Rahm Emanuel from closing 50 schools. He started with like this really big list of over 100 schools that he was gonna close, and then he allowed people to believe he only closed 50 because he was benevolent. You know, they performed this Hunger Games trial run where people would go from meeting to meeting, begging, crying, pleading for their schools to be spared from closing. Think about that. So he closes these 50 schools in 2013. Karen Lewis didn't know what to say the next day because I was in the meeting. She had to say something. So it was decided that she would say, we have to change the political landscape. in order to preserve and save our schools. In order to preserve and save the public good in Chicago, we would have to change the political landscape. People mistook that Karen Lewis wanted to only be electoral. No, Karen Lewis, as a labor leader, understood that the mayor of Chicago was our boss. We were under mayoral control. And so that in order to effectuate the right type of change in our workplaces, schools, we had to contest the boss. So we contested the boss and his cronies through elections. We did, and we lost a whole bunch of them. And it was okay, because what we were doing was shifting the electorate. Changing the political landscape doesn't mean you win. It means you organize people to a vision of the type of society and spaces that you want to occupy. See the difference? Intention. The intention is not to put someone in a place that may vote with you somehow. The intention is to organize the electorate to have an expectation of a thing that you can hold that person accountable for. See the difference? One is more powerful. So we did that. We lost a lot, but what we gained was the trust, the engagement of an electorate who now believed that schools needed the resources, that they shouldn't be closed, believed that educators were not their enemy, and that the union might be a decent, upstanding space, right? But we didn't do that as a public relations campaign. We got into fights. We got into fights with powerful Democrats and powerful Republicans. Listen to what I'm saying. The only sacred cow are those children, because we built intention first. So everybody got some. The boss got it, elected officials received it. And in coalition, we created opportunities to struggle together on the things that we were in solidarity about. Make no mistake, coalition work is crazy work. It is. That's why people don't like to do it. There's a reason why so few exist. And the only way that we keep us free and we take care of each other is through coalition. There is literally no other way. Applause line. And that's your call to action, is that in this space, this is not theoretical. It is literally the only way, trust me. And it is hard, and it is bruising, and it is a whole bunch of things, and it is the only way. Intention. So we formed this coalition, and getting back to the community groups that were keeping vigil, it was a whole tapestry of community groups from the north side to the south side to the west side, fighting the privatization, fighting the closings of their schools, the marginalizations, the consolidations. And so we meet up with some of them. Diet High School. The Kenwood Oakland Community Organization was where Reverend Jesse Jackson, first stopped in Chicago. It wasn't PUSH. It wasn't the Rainbow Coalition. It was COCO first, right? Little known facts, history teacher. And this organization is one of the hardest coalition partners at the table, because they don't believe you, because they have no reason to, because there's no data or evidence to ever believe anything except for they're gonna be black and they're gonna die. Because everything else shifts, it oppresses, it chokes off power and opportunity. And members went on a hunger strike with these people for 34 days to save a high school, Diet High School. And they went on a hunger strike with them because through the struggle, we figured out that coalition would be the only way. And then if you're in coalition with the community group, you got to figure out what their strike is. So many times community groups come join us on the picket line. They know what that strike is, right? But what is their strike? What does labor, what do policymakers, what do electeds, what do researchers give the community? Well, 3 of our members gave their bodies. They gave their bodies to save a school that had already been closed. At the time of it being closed, 13 kids, they were taking physical education online. How? How? "13 students, and there was a 34-day hunger strike. The school is open. Hope. Hope in action. And it's open as a sustainable community school. Because after the strike, our union took that school and others to the negotiating table. And we bargained for it to be a community sustainable school. Excuse me, a sustainable community school. I was like, that didn't sound right. It gets more resources, human and financial. They just celebrated the first state championship boys basketball team this past winter. They have artists in residence at this school now. And they build all these pretty mosaics throughout their facility. Parents and community members, the people who went on a hunger strike, they have agency in that school because it's a community school. The lead organizer, G2 Brown, is a member of the Chicago Board of Education that he helped move from a hunger strike to an elected board and now to a board member. So you heard what I just said there. G2 Brown organized the hunger strike. Then he worked as an organizer to get the General Assembly to give us an elected school board so decisions like the one that was made about diet would have a democratic process. He won that, and then he got elected to be that. See, in order to have possibility, you got to do some work. Organizing is at the center of it, and in coalition with others. This room is the coalition. What are you going to organize? Who do you intend to benefit? What are the possibilities of this coalition? Is it in winning and expanding democracy in the 21st century where it is under severe attack? Is it participating in an electoral contest that you help to anchor with the people you've struggled with? Is it going on strike in order to win the community schools that can be sustained and stabilized in neighborhoods for the children you intend for this to work for? Is it staying militant and unapologetic about loving people and working for them? It's all of those things, you all. And you can't do all of those things in your silo. You have to do those things in the tapestry, messiness, craziness of coalition. So I challenge you to see beyond whatever the thing is and create the things that you can create in solidarity. Your news programs sound just like the ones I listened to in Chicago. Terrible. And that's our fault, because everything that you are experiencing here is everything that we are experiencing in Chicago. And for us to be some of the smartest, most righteous organizers and thinkers and doers, why aren't we thinking, organizing, and researching and doing all across this world? This can no longer be about the Elons or the Trumps. It has to be about how working families are anchored in the ethic of transformation. We elected a mayor from our ranks. One of those hunger strikers is a mayor too. Be intentional about your liberation and about mine too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Well, folks, I'm sorry to say it, but we've reached the end of the 2025 Progress Summit. I've had a wicked time spending the last few days with all of y'all. Ce summit, c'est un lieu pour réfléchir, pour apprendre les uns des autres et pour créer des alliances qui dureront. Summits like this are a reminder that even in tough times, especially in tough times, we are not alone. We're a community. We're a movement. Hell, we're the weirdest little family. And when we come together, we make each other stronger. Like Stacy said, because coalition is the only way forward. That's why this year we're super grateful you joined us in the middle of an intense election cycle with so much at stake. Your presence here, your voice, your ideas, they matter more than ever. Over the last few days, we dared to take on the tough stuff. We talked about housing, we talked about healthcare, climate, inequality, rising authoritarianism, and more than just talk, we built strategy and we took action that we hope that all of you will take home to where you live. Throughout the day, we looked backwards and we looked forward for solutions, and also we didn't shy away from the present moment and the crises we face. Many of you took part in the Progressive Economic Policy Timeline, the results of which are now on live on our website at broadbentinstitute.ca. Please check them out. Please share them. And now, to help us close out this powerful gathering, please join me in welcoming back my friend, the Executive Director of the Broadbent Institute, Jen Hassan.
Once again, thank you so much for being with us for these past couple days. Maybe other people in the room, your voice is like mine. It's interesting, like we've found our voices, our very powerful voices, but physically, mine is drained. Maybe the karaoke last night, maybe it was since you've been gone, like maybe that's what put it over the edge. This was such an inspiring conference. And we are facing a multiplicity of crises. And I think Ed would have been proud. He's someone who never backed down from big questions, and who also posed questions that he didn't know the answers to seek out information, and to learn even contradictory ideas. And that's how we build real, meaningful solutions. And of course, we are able to make those sort of propositional ideas through the power that comes from working together, from talking with one another, and then within our communities, doing that real world organizing, that real solidarity. And what an amazing speech from President Davis Gates to close us off. Absolutely. A big thank you to our sponsors who made this event possible. That includes, of course, our platinum sponsors, CUPE, Meta, UFCW, Mapsio, the United Steelworkers, and our incredible, yes, our incredible title sponsors, the Canadian Labour Congress and Action Network. Thank you, of course, to our award winners, so the York Southwest Intense organizers, Richard Gilbert, and of course, this year's Ellen Mixon Woods Award winner, whose video we saw, so Grace Blakely. I hope to see everybody in Toronto for that. You'll also be receiving in a few minutes an email, and it's a survey to find out what you liked about the summit, any ideas, things like that, so that we can build upon and improve it next time, because things aren't perfect. We're a pretty small group of people to put on such an ambitious project. So your feedback is absolutely welcome. And if that doesn't motivate you enough, there's a prize. So be sure to fill out the form. I also want to thank everyone who made it possible. So our lovely MCs, Jared and Gabrielle. Yep. Heather and Galia, who are assisting. Our communications folks, so Mike and Kamara, thank you so much for volunteering. Project X, our translators, thank you. And a very, very special thank you to all of the Broadbent staff. They're incredible. Jack did not even write it in here. I am not sparing naming the names of the Broadbent staff who worked tirelessly to put this together. So thank you to Jack, to Emily, to Jordan, to Margarita, I see you over there, to Joy, to Ella, Ryan, Kat, Clement. I see Jen, JYB, she's backstage. Devin, and the entire Press Progress team. So thank you to Emma, Stephen, Eric, Luke, Romy. Thank you so much. We're such a small crew of people, but together we've accomplished so much. So I hope that you leave here feeling inspired, feeling energized about some of the possibilities that are before us in order to confront some of these challenges head on. It's not going to be easy. Like, really think about what could be happening if the destruction that is going to wreak havoc on our economy truly happens. There will be so much pain. There could be increased divisions. And we need to be ready. We need to be ready and organized and prepared to meet the moment together. We really do. So thank you so much for your time and your energy and for choosing to join us here today, because we can do it. We can do this together. Merci.